Okay. Let's let some people get into the stream. I will also tweet out that I am live. Okay. Let's go. Awesome. Hey, what's going on, guys? Thank you so much. Just going to let some more people come in. I am just going to tweet out the link to everyone that we are live, and we will get going. We will get going. This is going to be a fun one. Also, please forgive me, guys, if I don't read the comments as much as I normally do. Just when I go on my tangents, you know, I usually just keep rambling. So, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. And for those that showed up, I really appreciate it very much. Let us see here. Oh, let's go live. Yeah, this is live. Okay. Let's get the... here we go. Copy link. There we go. All right. Let's head on over to Twitter. For those that have come in early, hey, what's going on, guys? Great to see all of you. Yeah, for those who are here a little bit early, get to see a little, you know, behind the scenes. Lots of interesting stuff that that are going on. Oh, wow. Speaking of which, Ross Coulthart has been told there's a very active espionage campaign by China regarding anti-gravity research going on in places like Huntsville, Alabama. Interesting. Okay. Live now. Okay. I'm gonna tweet that. All right. Hey, what's happening, everyone? This is awesome. Sweet, sweet, sweet. Okay. Just tweeting it out. Oh, cool. Lou's going to be on Jimmy Church there. John Barron. Trump with the mustache. That's funny. Wow. Holy crap. We got quite a few of you guys in here this early. I was expecting to wait a little bit longer, but I mean, we could get going. Oh, the family. I appreciate that. You hit the bell finally. Eddie, thank you so much, man. Dude, this cold is the longest cold I've had in my life at this point. In terms of just like a basic sinus, then what led to an upper respiratory infection, this is the longest I've had it. But in fairness, this is the most cold... It's the most coldest weather conditions I've ever been in my life. And I don't think I've seen sun in, at this point, 2.5 months, roughly. So, I mean... Hey, what's going on, guys? Sweet, sweet, sweet. All right. You know what, at this point, I figure, hey, Pepe, what's happening? So at this point, I figure, you know what, let's, there's about 30 of you in here, let's get it going. So there's quite a lot to look into. Again, as you see here, we're going to be doing some fun stuff. This is going to be a 2.5 hour stream, so we'll have a lot of fun. And please forgive me, as usual, if I don't check the chat as often as I normally would. As you guys, most of you have come to know, once I get into this kind of stuff, I really, I really keep going on tangents. But let me zoom in for you guys here. Let me make sure that my face is not covering anything. If not, I will minimize it. Let me just a second here. I think, yeah, I'm gonna minimize my face. Okay, I'm gonna bring this in a little bit. There we go. All right, so this is interesting, guys, because this particular report, paper, whatever you want to refer to it as, from my understanding, was written many, many years ago, and just recently it's been circulating. We see here 2003, I believe, October 2003. It's been circulating in the UFO community very recently, and I don't think that it's an accident whatsoever. And I say that because if we take a look, for example, before we jump into it, if we just type in, say, 6-layer model, you know, Jacques Vallee, let's say, right? And we head on over to, say, pointofconvergence.net. They say here, oh, look at the study of the data we've just uncovered, right? We take a look at the pulse.1, a recently discovered study, right, by Eric Davis and Jacques Vallee. So it's interesting to see that it's coming out now relative to the timing of what came out pertaining to, for those who don't know, Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein, right? So we see Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein, and I'm not sure if you guys saw that. I don't know if we get copyrighted for watching it or listening to it near the end of the stream, but it is quite interesting because this one right here, because again, you do see how Puthoff, again, who was the one who ran the CIA's Stargate program for a couple decades at the least, from my understanding, he seemed very calm, collected, and he sort of had this persona that when he was speaking with Mr. Eric Weinstein, he sort of kind of said, like, look, he had this mannerism about him, which was, you don't have to believe me, you know. And again, the reason I say this, guys, is because I find people like, again, Staff Sergeant Clifford Stone, people, Phil Schneider, people like Hal Puthoff, Jim Lakatsky, they seem to be very like, we don't really care if you believe us or not, and for those who do believe us, this is what we're working on right now. Again, maybe I'm wrong, and I would be hesitant, but I would sort of man up and admit that I've been duped, and I would apologize if it's come out that this is some one big major psyop, so to speak. But again, I highly doubt that. It's hard to say, but let's jump into it. So also keep in mind, guys, Dr. Eric Davis is also the individual whom has those traversable wormhole reports that he wrote for the Air Force in, I believe, 2003 or 4, that was sent to 6 Draco Drive, Saturn Boulevard, the whole thing. So let's jump into it. So, Incommensurability, Orthodoxy, and the Physics of High Strangeness, a 6-layer model for anomalous phenomenon. Now, I want to say before we jump in, guys, there's going to be a lot of things here that I have to say. If you are familiar with the with David Icke's Saturn Moon matrix sort of proposal, it seems to be, I'm not saying that, but something within that range or vicinity of conversation. So again, take it as you will. The main argument presented in this paper is that the continuing study of unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, interesting that they were using this term so long ago, relative to how it's been modernized now, may offer an existence theorem for new models of physical reality. The current SETI paradigm, SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and its assumption of mediocrity place restrictions on forms of non-human intelligence that may be researched. A similar bias exists in the ufologist's often stated hypothesis that UAP, or UFOs, if real, must represent space visitors. Observing that both models are based by anthropomorphism, the authors attempt to clarify the issues surrounding high strangeness observations by distinguishing 6 layers of information that can be derived from UAP events. Now, this is when it's going to get interesting, guys, because as we go through each layer, I'm going to try and make real-time examples and correlations. So, the first one is the physical manifestation. The second one is anti-physical effects. The third is psychological factors, and the fourth is physiological factors. The fifth is psychic effects, and the sixth is cultural effects. In a further step, they propose a framework for scientific analysis of UAP that takes into account the incommensurability problem. What do they mean by incommensurability? Well, let's take a look at something here called the zone of proximal development, okay? And the reason I bring this up is because we see here, the zone of proximal development is the distance between what a learner is not capable of doing unsupported and what they can do unsupported. It is the range where they're capable only with support from someone with more knowledge or expertise. All right, it seems like, based on what this report is saying, is that you see this right here, guys, the zone of proximal development. So this inner circle with the darker blue is what we do know, the things that we can do on our own. It seems like the UAP topic seems to be right in this exact same barrier right there. Again, you can call this pattern of reinforcement, as what Jacques Vallee coins as, has been used in psychology. It's the same way when you throw your pet or your dog a ball, right? And then they get rewarded with a treat or something if they bring the ball back to you and put it in your hand. So it's the same concept. We use the zone of proximal development when we're throwing a ball for our dogs, right? So why would that not be the same type of concept here? Because we see right over here, Jacques Vallee UFO quotes. He says right here, "My personal contention is that the phenomenon is the result of an intelligence, that it is a technology directed by an intelligence, and that this intelligence is capable of manipulating space and time in ways that we do not understand." So let's get back to the report right over here. Let's see here. This is based on a presentation at the Forum on Science, Religion, and Consciousness in Portugal, October 24th, 2003. So, The challenge of high strangeness. The rational study of reported cases of UAP is currently at an impasse. The situation has much to do with the incomplete state of our models of physical reality as it does with the complexity of the data. Basically saying here, we don't even understand our own world, right? A primary objection to the reality of UFOs, even among scientists, is that witnesses consistently report objects whose seemingly absurd behavior cannot possibly be related to actual phenomenon, even under extreme conditions. All right? Skeptics insist that intelligence visitors would simply not perpetrate such antics as are reported in the literature. This argument can be criticized as an anthropocentric, self-selected observation resulting from our own limited viewpoint as 21st century Homo sapiens. Nonetheless, the high strangeness of many reports must be acknowledged. Okay, so we see here, again, this basically covers what actually has been disclosed publicly already, so I'll probably just, I'll probably just skip over this here, but point being is that it has to do with our own, confirmation bias, our own culture bias, all of that. So let's jump to 1 second here. The need for a unified approach. Yes, okay. Let's take a look at the physical layer. So first of all is the physical layer. It evident in most accounts describing an object that can occupy positions in space consistent with geometry, moves as time passes, interacts with the environment through thermal effects, exhibits light absorption and emission from which power output estimates can be derived, produces turbulence. When landed, it leaves indentations and burns from which mass and energy figures can be derived. It gives rise to photographic images. It leaves material residue consistent with Earth chemistry, and it gives rise to electric, magnetic, and gravitational disturbances. Now, except for the produces, if I'm not mistaken, I may be incorrect about this, but producing turbulence, except for that, I think this explains perfectly some UFO cases, and I say that because if we take a look, and I'll make sure that we don't go that I don't go off on random tangents here, but if we take a look at saucer nests, if I'm not mistaken, yes, the Tully saucer nest. Yeah, it gets interesting because you start dealing with different forms of radiation and things like this. So we'll look at this shortly afterwards, but take a look at this. Thus, UAP, in a basic physical sense, are consistent with a technology centered on a craft that appears to be using a revolutionary propulsion system. So let's give a perfect example of what a physical, I guess you could say, layer would be. All right, so take a look at this. Let's see here. I retweeted this, I believe. Actually, sorry, my likes. There we go. Right here. So this right over here, the Foo Fighter Sphere, all right, allegedly is, seen in the skies and all that stuff, and some people have gotten their hands on it, allegedly. Now, what we find here is that this is a sample of the materials analysis of this particular sphere right over here, okay? So if we take a quick little look, we'll find here the various types of carbon nanotubes are the materials with the highest known tensile strength, and strength to weight ratios also have excellent electrical conductivity as well as semiconducting properties. The crystals imaged in the metal coating could act as sensors and or nano radio frequency receivers and transmitters. So, when it says exhibits light absorption and emission from which power output estimates can be derived, please do not be confused, folks, with thinking, oh, there needs to be a typical, a jet engine or some form of propulsion that we know it to be. Again, form of propulsion to these beings could in fact be, again, a metal just like this. But anyways, we see here, layer number 2. For lack of an adequate term, we will call the second layer anti-physical. The variables are the same as those in the previous category, but they form patterns that conflict with those predicted by modern physics. Objects are described as physical and material, but they're also described as sinking into the ground, shrinking in size, growing larger or changing shape on the spot, becoming fuzzy and transparent on the spot, dividing, and by the way, I understand, guys, quick little side note, this becomes even more difficult these days because of CGI and things like this, right? But we're going to actually make some connections to these right away because there's some things here that need to be addressed that are already covered. So sinking into the ground, becoming fuzzy and transparent on the spot, dividing into two or more craft, several of them merging into one object at slow speed. This has been quite apparent to the masses lately. Lots of sightings of this, particularly of the triangle craft, sort of the TR3 Telos, I believe it is. This one right here, it's the one that was, we see here, TR3 Telos, excuse me, UFO. Not, anyways, it had to do with the same this one right here, excuse me, the TR6, this one right here. So again, and allegedly in the newer models, these beams of light at the bottom can also be individual orbs, that like AI orbs that are, I don't know about synthetic, but they can think on their own, drones if you want to call it that, so to speak. Telos stands for, allegedly, Trans-Atmospheric Electrogravitic Low Observability Surveillance Platform. So anyways, let's jump back to this right here. Disappearing at one point and appearing elsewhere instantaneously, remaining observable visually while not detected by radar, producing missing time or time dilation, right? This has been documented, by the way, particularly by Air Force pilots who say, holy crap, I've used, 5 minutes worth of fuel in my jet, Air Force pilots, but I've only used 5 minutes worth of fuel, but an hour's gone by. This doesn't make any sense, right? Producing, now this is big, guys. I know these are all, mumbo jumbo words and all that stuff, but I want to point this out. Producing topological inversion or space dilation. Object was estimated, for example, the object was estimated to be of small exterior size, but witnesses saw a huge interior, many times the exterior size. Those are pocket dimensions, folks. Again, keep in mind, I didn't even, to be honest, I read through this report yesterday, but I didn't before we went live, and this is interesting, because look at what we've been discussing. People say that, a craft looks 50 feet in diameter, its radius and all that, and then all of a sudden they walk inside, and it's literally like 10, 15, 20,000 square feet on the inside. So this is when it gets interesting. Producing, topological inversion. Now, let's do a quick search of what topology is, okay? Because this is big. This seems to connect to the Project Carrot documents as well. It is the study of a given place, especially the history of a region, and as indicated by its topography. Here we go. The study of certain properties that do not change as geometric figures or spaces undergo continuous deformation. These properties include openness, nearness, connectedness, and continuity. All right, so again, these are objects and geometric objects that are preserved under continuous deformation, such as stretching, twisting, crumpling, and bending. That is, without closing holes, opening holes, tearing, gluing, or passing through itself. Extremely complex stuff, but it would certainly substantiate the Project Carrot documents pertaining to when that whistleblower said, when you put that language in a certain frequency, then it started to move on its own. It would certainly make sense. Anyways. And the final point is appearing as balls of colored, intensely bright light under intelligent control, right? We could say, and maybe this is a stretch, maybe not, not ball lightning, plasma. Ball lightning seems to be a little bit of a fringe topic as well, pertaining to the peer-reviewed academic, scientific community, but it seems to be less and less these days. Point being, though, is that anything plasma, we still ultimately, from my understanding, we don't know what plasma is, and I think there's a reason it's sort of stayed like that. Sort of similar to how Eric Weinstein and how Pudov in the that conversation that just came out a couple days ago implied that, not saying it's factual, but implied that string theory could have actually been something to throw off the scientific community for a very long point in time. Because of things, for example, like the J phenomenon. This was a phenomenon that allegedly produced anti-gravity in just one of many different ways that was quickly covered up. Anyways, the next thing is the third layer. The third layer has to do with the psychology of the witness and the social conditions that surround them. Human observers tend to see UAP while in their normal environment and in normal social groupings. They perceive objects as non-conventional, but they try to explain them away as common occurrences until faced with the inescapable conclusion that the object is truly unknown. So this is what gets interesting, guys, because, again, we see right over here, these points at the top that we just went through. Let's take a look at this right over here. Let's go Christopher Mellon leaked A-tip slides. And I'm sorry for those that have seen me do this quite often. I don't mean to be a broken record. It's just, again, we really got to, in my opinion, sort of hammer this down, so to speak. Here we go. Oops. My apologies, guys. There's, here we go. Is it this one? The missing slides? Did it not? Christopher Mellon. Actually, let me go like this. A-tip. Should be super easy to find. Don't know why. Wow. Okay, well, here we go. Oh, perfect. Thank God. All right. The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate U.S. facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security. Now, of course, it's treated as a threat, but okay, fine. Let's put that to the side for a second. So let's do some literal side-by-side comparisons. Sinking into the ground, shrinking in size, growing larger, or changing shape on the spot. Okay, well, penetration of solid surfaces, right? We see here instantaneous sensor assembly, psychotronic weapons. I would imagine that would be it. And I don't believe this report is speaking of biological material, meaning, you know, flesh, skin, you know, even individuals like you and I. But we see here alteration / manipulation of biological organisms. To me, guys, at least, I interpret that as shape-shifting, amongst a few other things. If you can implement this with some type of psychotronic, cognitive human interface, you got like a Barney and Betty Hill experience going. And even then, that's considered allegedly on the lighter side of things. Let's see here. Producing missing time or time dilation. Now, okay, this is when it gets really interesting in my opinion, because if we go to, for example, concentrics, just a circle here, right? As I've been using lately, especially members on Patreon will know, but pretend, for example, when people say, oh, Dave, how could these craft, you know, go through rock or go through walls, brick, like, you know, a knife going through butter. Like literally like that. And it looks like something out of a movie, that to the point where we would assume it's CGI. How? Well, let's say, for example, we are within this circle here. This is the frequency in which the dimension we're in right now is operating on and off of, right? That is the general frequency we're on, okay? Now, imagine if the craft had some way, again, going back to initially, we were looking at different forms of propulsion, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be coming out of one spot. If the frequency surrounding the craft, the energy fields, I'm sure more than one, were to be able to, I'm trying to think of the right word, guys. Let's say vibrate itself into this layer, the second layer from the middle, then it could be visualized from you and me with the human eye as being in the physical realm, but any physical object it interacts with in this realm, it'll walk right through, because it is not in this layer. It is in a higher layer, sort of like an onion. I don't know. Is this making sense, guys? I hope that makes sense. Sorry, let me check the chat before I go on. Let's see here. Just want to make sure I got all this. Sweet, thank you, Brandy, for that definition there. Yes, IMXY. Yes, I did watch the halftime commercials, not in real time, but I did, and that will be covered shortly. Jack, density shift. Right, very right. Jeffrey asks, in your opinion, how much of this is DARPA tech? Ooh, that's a good question, Jeffrey. Well, if you guys would like to know my thoughts on that, before we get back to that report, since I just finished explaining this, what we could do very quickly is take a look at this right here. DARPA's Vapor program. Allegedly, this was a reverse engineered program. Stands for Vanishable Programmable Resources. Now, interestingly enough, if you click on it, you can't find it. They've archived the article from DARPA.mil. 2 weeks ago, I did an episode on it, and this link opened up totally fine. I'm not saying I was the cause of this. I'm just saying, literally, guys, 2 days after I presented this episode, that it went live, they DARPA archived it. So, Jeffrey, to answer your question, I think ultimately, let's see. I think vast majority of what we see now is DARPA tech. I don't think that it's alien tech in terms of it's right in front of our faces, the craft we see. I think it's DARPA. I don't want to put a label on it per se, Jeff, with respects to, is it DARPA, is it the Air Force? It's extremely compartmentalized, man. I wish I could give you more of a straight answer, but I mean, the reason I wanted to bring this up here is because if we take a look at this, news.xerox.com, Xerox PARC, by the way, one of the first companies to work with back in the day, California labs from the Roswell Tech and all that. But look at this. DARPA-funded Vanishing Electronics offers commercial promise in personal data protection and distributed sensing. So PARC, Xerox PARC, performed several dozen live demonstrations of the transient technology, where attendees used a standard laser pointer to provide a remote logical signal that triggered a current pulse in a resistive heater. Now, you guys might say, Dave, what the heck are you talking about? And this is sort of a long form to Jeffrey's question, but I appreciate the question, because if we take a look here, DARPA vapor, right, and we go to images, this is real, guys. So basically, the DARPA vapor program was allegedly an attempt to reverse engineer some alien tech. Now, what was that alien tech? Allegedly, it was alien tech that was gelatin-like, and again, different craft have different looks. Gelatin meaning like jello, right? Now, interestingly enough, Bill Uhouse, who worked directly under Edward Teller, allegedly, Bob Lazar, again, think of these individuals as you will, claimed to have seen in the facilities in which they were working, bell-looking, gel-like craft. Like, if you touched it, it was like jello. And apparently these beings have an ability where if they have this gelatin-based craft, and they touch it, it can then disintegrate into its environment. And DARPA's been trying to use that for multiple reasons, military purposes, you name it. And then when you press it again, use a remote to sort of make it remanifest, it then literally remanifests into, in this case, for example, a chip, let's just say, right? So, again, the tech is there. A lot of people may not even believe that it'll remanifest into this. I know that sounds crazy or magical, if you will, but the reason why I wanted to bring this up, Jeffrey, is because, Jeffrey Wilson, your question is this DARPA stuff. I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of reverse engineering, a little bit of, honestly, human ingenuity implemented. I also think that we've sort of taken what we've been handed from ETs, allegedly, and all that, and, have put our own human angle to it. But this was the program, guys. Now, the reason I'm reading this to you right here is because several dozen live demonstrations of this tech were performed. But interestingly enough, we see here, attendees used a standard laser pointer that triggered a pulse in a resistive heater, which provided the energy to initiate a defect and disintegrate the device within a couple seconds. All right? And then it could also be triggered with a radio frequency, as well as physical or chemical triggers. I'm reading this to you because notice this. It used a standard laser pointer. We see right here. This standard pen-like laser pointer is the most commonly referred to, I guess you could say, application, device, external form that multiple species across many different points in time have been known to use. Whether it's to use a pen, this type of pen to freeze an individual, to abduct them, to like many different things. Or even, as a matter of fact, if we head back here, to make them have unique cognitive human interface experiences. The difference between unique cognitive human interface experiences and cognitive human interface at the top here is that unique means that literally, guys, like I'll just use Jeffrey since he asked. Jeffrey, brother, if you were sitting right next to me, literally side by side, these aliens say they use that pen-like device or something of the sort to make you experience something that you see all around you that is entirely separate than what I'm just sitting here. Like, what, I got the mic, I got I see the room, and I see you, but you're like snapped out of it because you're not even technically in, I guess you could say, in this dimension per se, which could be why, again, Bob Lazar claimed that the briefing documents he received, and the only reason I bring him up so much is because some of the briefing documents corroborate with the Project Carrot whistleblower, but even then, it could be a psyop. But point being is that these briefing documents allegedly said that these EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities, refer to us as containers. So again, this is why I bring that up. But great question, Jeffrey. Let me check the chat and have a sip of water before we continue on. Hey, what's going on, Paul? Let's see here. Yeah, Michael, it's yeah, our tech from the 30s, 40s. Yeah, Eddie looks like Mercury. Um, Jack, is it advanced nanomaterial that could explain the melting and later reconstruction? Very possible, Jack. We then have to ask ourselves, nanomaterial, synthetic. I got to be careful because of YouTube, but black goo, graphene. We have to ask ourselves, to what point is that mergence possible? Mergence between AI and that's a whole other thing. But yes, yes. Let's see. Self-assembling nano, exactly. Interestingly enough, this also seems to be consistent with the different ways in which if you were to split, and this, by the way, guys, has been undisputed, at least to my knowledge. Please correct me if you know something I don't. I mean that. But it's been undisputed based on my research that every UFO whistleblower that claims to have worked on the craft to one extent or the other say that, again, no matter how much you break the craft up, it is, and you analyze it at a nanomolecular level, even at a subatomic level, it is a map of the rest of the craft, which is consistent with Bill Uhouse, with the Carrot whistleblower. Again, so we can go on and on, but let's jump back to the report here. The third layer has to do with the psychology of the witness and the social conditions that surround them. Human observers tend to see UAP while in their normal environment and in normal social groupings. They perceive the objects as non-conventional, but they try to explain them away as common occurrences until faced with the inescapable conclusion that the object is truly unknown. Now, this is what gets interesting, because how do we define it's real versus unknown? Because what is real, what is not real? Actually, you know what? Honestly, we're gonna have a lot of fun on this stream. We're gonna go into some stuff that about astral vibrations and things that will connect to this. But anyways, the psychological reactions are another significant layer of information. The phenomenon is reported to cause sounds, beeping, buzzing, humming, deafening, roaring, whistling, swooshing, all that, vibrations, burns, partial paralysis, extreme heat or cold sensation, odors. Powerful, sweet, or strange fragrance, rotten eggs, sulfurous, pungent, musky. These odors allegedly are more associated with that of the Greys because allegedly I can't say YouTube would nick me, but yeah. Metallic taste, pricklings, temporary blindness when exposed to the objects is light, nausea, bloody nose. By the way, this is all stuff that direct energy weapons can do, to be fair. So again, just to play devil's advocate, drowsiness in the days following a close encounter. This is when it gets a little bit more, I guess you could say, it's an ominous feeling, Eddie. Yes, exactly. So let's see here. The fifth category of effects can only be labeled psychic because it involves a class of phenomenon commonly found in the literature of parapsychology, such as impressions of communication without a direct sensory channel, poltergeist. So that would be, I imagine, when people hear voices in their head and they're not hallucinations, they're not the result of any type of psychotic episode. They're, the voice then substantiates that it's, it is some type of external source communicating with you. A poltergeist phenomenon. Motions and sounds without a specific cause outside the observed presence of a UAP. Please, I want to remind you folks that Eric Davis at least claimed that you always, always, always have poltergeist activity after a UFO event. So again, take that as you will. It's not my place to say that that's factual or not. Levitation of the witness or of objects and animals in the vicinity. Maneuvers of a UFO or UAP appearing to anticipate the witness's thoughts. Yeah, that's that makes sense. Some people have claimed, not often, but claimed, the craft went to a place, it jumped from one place to another, like right this millisecond after I thought about going to that place myself. So, premonitory, dreams or visions, personality changes promoting unusual abilities in the witness, and healing. So, at this point, I'm thinking, let's take a look right over here, okay, folks, at the CIA.gov, the reading room. This is done by Hal Puthoff, we see here from the Stargate program, and Mario P. Varvoglis. Now, if we zoom in, this is what I find very interesting. Based on interviews of French-speaking researchers, an attempt is made to determine some of the issues which may contribute to communication and collaboration problems in parapsychology. Okay, so, you know what, let's just do a quick little, let's go parapsychology. is the study of alleged psychic phenomenon and other paranormal claims. For example, those related to near-death experiences, apparitions, synchronicity. It is considered to be pseudoscience, and a vast majority of mainstream scientists reject it. Now, I want to also keep in mind, folks, that I'm not trying to sort of split hairs here, but we also have to understand what paranormal means per se. Paranormal means something, from my understanding, out of the ordinary, right? So we generally associate paranormal with ghosts and things like that, but I very kindly ask you folks to sort of broaden your perception if you can, because it's more than just ghost spirits. I mean, it could come to a point where we can define ghosts as being some type of plasma intelligence, as Dan Winter says, if you will, right? Hard to say, but the point being here is that it is argued that these problems reflect broader issues than just language barriers. American parapsychologists are the most, quote, successful of parapsychologists in terms of organization, recognition, funding, and social standing. Insofar as they are in a leadership position, they're largely responsible for defining the field's subject matter and methods, as well as qualitative standards for experimentation. And the situation has contributed to the creation of hierarchical, rather than peer-like, relationships within the field in which Anglo-Saxon parapsychology dominates. All right, so now let's quickly look at Anglo-Saxon. They were a cultural group who inhabited England in the early Middle Ages. Right, so we see here it is a term that was rarely used by the Anglo-Saxons themselves. All right, so we find here that this seems to be the cultural influence based on the monarchy of England and things like this, the Anglo-Saxons, right? And so when we jump back to the CIA report here, we'll see this type of parapsychology dominates. This tends to alienate foreign researchers who disagree with some of the priorities or approaches of their American colleagues and do not wish to feel inferior to them. It is suggested that if we truly wish to improve international communication and collaboration, we must come to recognize the socioeconomic, cultural, and philosophical relativity of our own approach, and thus be more open to divergences in style and philosophy within the field. This is what Mr. Vallee, from my understanding, was referring to when he talked about, please forgive me, the need for, let me see here, the social, yes, exactly, the social, the psychological aspect and the social aspect, which, again, if we jump back to, the report here, we'll see divergences in style and philosophy. Yes, and this also, again, has to do with, at the very top here, sorry guys, had a bit of a brain fart, what Mr. Vallee was referring to in terms of anthropomorphism and, confirmation bias and assumption of mediocrity. Right, and placing restrictions because we assume, for example, that, again, I think this was brought up in the conversation with Kurt from Theories of Everything, but it's the whole thing of like, oh well, if we were to discover a new type of creature, let's say, that's been living on this planet, whether very small or very large or in another dimension or frequency we cannot see, a lot of people, right away, their mind would think, oh, what type of food do they eat? But who says they even eat food? Who says that food in the way that we understand, right, is the way in which they harness and fuel themselves with energy? And so that's what Mr. Vallee, I would assume, or presume rather, was referring to here when he was talking about, again, this assumption of mediocrity, these anthropomorphism, confirmation bias, expanding the perception of one's paradigm, so to speak. See anthropocentric bias in the paradigms, right? So let's see here. Oh, by the way, I wanted to bring this up. Mr. Vallee and Dr. Eric Davis, they wrote this, so keep this in mind. And if they wrote this and they know this for a fact, that's huge. And if they don't and they still wrote it, that's one big psyop. And yeah, so we see here, yet a bridge could be formed between the disparate SETI and ufology communities if both would only recognize a simple fact. No experiment can distinguish between phenomenon manifested by visiting interstellar ETI and intelligent entities that may exist near Earth within a parallel universe or in different dimensions, or who are terrestrial time travelers. Each of these interesting possibilities can be manifested via the application of the physical principle of traversable wormholes. Again, I want to point out the data points and the consistency of traversable wormholes. We see now how Puthoff, right, brought this up with Eric Weinstein, Staff Sergeant Clifford Stone said it, Dr. Eric Davis. Now, the devil's advocate debate to that, so to speak, is, okay, Dave, you're citing people that sort of hover within the same circles of government. And I say, you know what? Granted. I honestly do, because I can't sit here and say, oh, guys, look at the data points without, while trying to, not paint the full picture here. But again, it's possible, very likely there is something to traversable wormholes, but we'll see here that traversable wormholes are but one example of new physical tools that are available or on the horizon for consideration of interuniversal, interstellar, interdimensional, or chronological travel. So again, my whole thing about this is that if they were so certain about this, why are they writing it with this right over here? If both communities would only recognize a simple fact. So clearly, Mr. Davis and Mr. Vallee would have had security clearances to make such a profound statement. Now, if they have these security clearances, which they do, and they're pulling a psyop, then that kind of sort of diminishes the meaning of security clearances relative to American military and the Pentagon and all that. Just my opinion. So either way, it's a lose-lose in terms of, when we ask these type of questions. So let's jump back over here. Here we go, citing. All right, here we are. In his JP paper, The Language Barrier in Parapsychology, Alvarado deplores the low level of communication and collaboration in international parapsychology. But while focusing largely on these formal measures, Alvarado also cautions that more basic cultural and philosophical issues may obstruct quick and easy solutions. So basically, guys, without reading this report, this document for too long, what they're discussing here has to do with the way in which there seems to be some type of interference in parapsychology in forms of communication. I think it doesn't just have to do with our pineal gland being suppressed. I think it also has to do with this right over here. Journal of an Astral Traveler. So again, I want to bring this up. Again, I'd like to thank Brandy for this, because this is simply just an individual who has logged their astral projection experiences. But it gets very, very interesting, because it starts to talk about different mind control grids, if you will, which is what I mentioned at the beginning of this stream about David Icke's, Saturn moon matrix proposal, right? Not saying everything he said is accurate, but it's possible the general premises would be, if not even a little bit more, right? So we'll see right over here. Okay, so we can refer to these beings that this person describes as archons, you name it, right? It talks about, the memory wipe, the soul trap, all of that. It discusses every single thing here. But let me see here. The reason I wanted to bring this up, and not to confuse you folks, is that it discusses how we may not actually be living in, and I have a Let's Get Banned on the Patreon coming out soon for the public. We may be living in a video game, part physical realm. So apparently, the way, or allegedly, what the Gnostics were saying was true, based on what this person wrote here. But I also tend to agree with that, and I wonder if the Gnostic narrative has actually stayed true over the years. But I'm sure there's been some attempt to distort them. Point being, we'll see, hold on, right down here. Here we are. I just had a dream where I ran into the white light. Again, this is the same white light that, again, people say when they die, their physical body dies, they walk into. I walked right up to it. I neutralized the energy it was radiating, so it had no effect on me. Now, this individual claims to have been very experienced in the astral realm, so they were able to do this, right? I went outside today, and the world and the people in it seemed less real, like I was playing a video game. Okay, now we see here that, one second, in the past, hold on. Sorry guys, I just want to make sure I'm getting the exact point here. I really want to point this out. Here we go. This is right. This is it. Perfect. I've recently learned a lot more about the physical world and how it was created. We created it, and then we forgot we created it. and some nasty negative entity called the demiurge took the credit. Now, before I go on, we could talk about the demiurge being the archon, some type of negative AI. Again, that's not for me to say. But my psychic abilities are going crazy lately, so I'm going to see, so I'm able to see things most people can't. This is the key here, folks. The physical world isn't physical, it's just dense energy. I'm not saying this is factual, but it makes sense based on the recent studies done by John Hopkins, and I think it was it Yale? Anyways, point being is that I'm sure many of you folks have already heard me say it many times. Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan were discussing it, where the test subjects, after getting off and coming down from their psychedelic experiences, said to the doctors in their report after their trip or experience, you don't get it. Like, the conversations I had with these beings while I was on psychedelics was way more real than what I'm having with you right now. Right? But how can you define what is more real than other things? And that, I would dare to say, is part of the dissemination of butchering the English language relative to of it coming from Latin, based on the long-term influence of these alleged reptilians, but maybe not. Again, point being, though, that, you know, the Gnostics seem to be warning of this, but not saying that they were absolutely correct. They could as well be part of the psyop, for all we know. Take a look at this now. The physical world isn't physical, it's just dense energy. The physical world is a super dense programmed dream world. The only difference between the physical world and a dream world you go to when you fall asleep is that the dream world is less dense. So the physical world is just another afterlife world. It is a dense programmed consensus reality created by the subconscious minds of the population. Some people's subconscious minds were pissed when I figured this out. The reason it seems so limited is because the programming is being enforced by the subconscious minds of the population. But we can take conscious control and turn it into a paradise. This is what they mean about coming together. And it's not just about kumbaya, let's all sit by the fire, everyone, you know, let's be happy, yada, yada. It has to do with inversion. Again, this is exactly what we're referring to when we talk about on the show waking up in the morning, feeling the stress of having to go pay your mortgage, to go pay your bills, get to work on time. That energy, that is that inversion. That is that inversion that is projecting outwards, when really we should be applying those energies inwards. Now, I'm not saying that as fact, because I'm not, not claiming to be the person that has the answers. But again, it seems to be the most consistent answer, or the most consistent conclusion, let's say, that at least I've come across. The only reason the physical world seems physical is because there is an energy field that blankets the planet that creates the illusion that it's physical when it isn't. This would be consistent with Vallee and Davis's work when Dr. Eric Davis says the problem with the UFO phenomenon is that it's so out of the realm of understanding that our leaders don't know how to legislate it on control it on a legislative basis. Again, it's exactly like this. Like we were talking about walking through walls earlier. What are you going to do? Put a law that says you can't, walk through walls after 7 p.m. And it's the same thing, right? I mean, Christ, look at Ottawa. They can't even control the honking. What are you going to control this stuff? But anyways, if you can see through this energy field, you will see that it is just a dream world. There's also an energy field that suppresses psychic abilities and makes it difficult for people in the astral to interact with us, but we can override the programming and do these things anyway. Also, I had an out-of-body experience recently where I created a world that was more dense than the physical world, although it didn't have the negative programming, so I could just sense that it was just energy. I've also learned that the archons are using our energy, again, here's the term, the archons, these alleged interdimensional parasites, that are using our energy that they harvested from us to program the matrix the way they want to. We see here, hold on. I've learned I can actually manipulate energy enough to reverse the aging process in my late 30s. I'm in my late 30s, and when I do this, I feel like I'm in my early 20s. Although to do something more extreme like reverse the aging process of an 8-year-old until he's in his 20s would probably take a lot of energy, and a group of awake people working together to override the programming. And the programming tries to reassert itself, so you have to be vigilant. So allegedly, this programming is also sort of like a computer software virus. It attacks when it realizes that somebody is, I guess you could say, waking up, ascending, you name it. We see here. Anyway, after doing this and telling other people how to do it, the Matrix hurled an insane amount of negative energy at me. Now, when we say hurled an insane amount, it sounds all fine and dandy, but again, I agree with you folks when you say, Dave, how can we put this in a real world example? Honestly, we could say mental breakdowns, what doctors would classify as hallucinations, things like this, schizophrenia. I'm not saying that this is the real reason behind schizophrenia and mental health issues. Please don't confuse me, folks, on that. But I'm saying that it's possible many cases that were, medical mental health cases that were actually spiritual issues. Obviously, we don't have that as a classification in this world. Were in fact that instead of, certain things like schizophrenia, you name it. Fortunately, because of my experience in the astral, I was able to neutralize most of it. The energy they used is energy they harvested from us. So I realized they were using our energy to program the matrix, but we can wake up and take control instead of having our reality dictated to us. Now, what we see here is that the matrix is an illusion. It's not physical. It just uses programmed energy fields to create that illusion that it is when it isn't. Let me see here. You can also make a small area of the physical world a lot less dense and do some really crazy stuff like grow arms and legs. Now, again, I know this is sort of getting into that whole, woo-woo type angle, so to speak, but I wanted to cover these 3 things right here, 4 things. There is an energy field that makes the physical world less dense. There is a separate energy field that suppresses psychic abilities, which could explain, I know it took me quite a while to get back to this, but which could explain this issue between that of the Anglo-Saxon perception of cultural parapsychology on a global scale, because what you have is people abiding, parapsychologists, even at a secretive level, with MI6, CIA, the Soviets, the KGB, you name it, using that Anglo-Saxon intention and form of cultural manifestation, which has ultimately limited the ability of psychics. Now, this is just a proposal. I'm not saying this is fact, guys. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that this is exactly what's happening, but it seems to be something that has to do with, again, as Dan Winter says, for those on the Patreon, you'll know, focused intention, right? So when something is focused and you're putting intent towards something, you can call that belief, imagination, whatever you want to call it. It does have energetic bioresonating frequencies that emit from it. We can even call that praying. It's the same thing. Right? What I'm trying to do here, folks, for those watching, is I'm trying to really have you folks sort of see it in the way that I'm seeing. I think a lot of you do, but anyways, I know we've had a lot of new subscribers lately, which thank you very much, by the way. Now, there's also an energy field that makes it difficult for us to interact with people in the astral. Again, people in the astral, ghosts, plasma, intelligences, what does that mean? We don't know. Truly, I don't know. I don't know, right? Let me see. Also, I've learned that the reason the sheeple can't seem to wake up is because the Matrix AI can control weak-minded people. It can't mind control strong-willed people, strong-willed aware people. So we are drowning in programming and energy and psychic manipulation. Let's see here. Oh, this is a great example of being in the Matrix or simulation. It's basically a holodeck, just not a technological one. Right? It's created by us, the subconscious minds. So we have been monumentally lied to about pretty much everything. Reality itself is not what people think it is. All right? When I'm around programmed people who believe the physical world is physical, it starts to become more physical because their subconscious mind is trying to impose its programming onto me, when usually it's more dreamlike because I see through the programming. Which 2 films can we relate this to that are extremely and avidly depictive of this? Inception. When people, what's her name there? I forgot her name. The actress there with Leonardo DiCaprio in the dream. When she starts to realize that she's in a dream, all those people all around her in that dream start looking at her because it is projections of her subconscious. Exact same thing. When people start to wake up, when I'm talking to you guys on the stream, when you start to wake up, ascend in your own way. It's not for me to tell you folks how to do that, so to speak. I can offer options, but again, I'm not saying I have the answers, but when you go shopping, you go to Walmart, you go to the grocery store, you start to realize people will look at you like they're jealous of you, like they're angry at you. Even if you just walk by them really quickly, they'll give you very angry eyes, glances, and those people that give you that look may not even realize it in some cases themselves why they're giving you that type of look. But that is exactly what this is, in my opinion at least, right? We see here, so reality is nothing what people think it is. The entire system of control is based on a limited reality program. If, or more like when, that program goes, the system goes with it. All right. We see right over here, it just takes focused intention. Just repeat the words less dense for a few minutes and you will start getting less dense. So again, take this as you will. And we see here, for example, there is an energy field that tries to stop the download of memories of dreams, of lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences. The matrix is created by layers of programmed energy fields. Right. So again, it's sort of complex in a certain way, particularly when you start making, not me personally, but some people have made statements like, oh, atoms are not real. And that's a big statement to make. Like, to say, atoms, like, atomic bomb, like this whole thing, how is it not real? If we really delve into the complexities of this, going back to, again, the issue that the CIA seemed to have here with respects to there being a barrier. Our subconscious is the barrier. It's just that we need to, in my opinion, realize that our species hit on the head with amnesia, and just by realizing that in and of itself, that realization sparks within the mind the bioresonance to increase, right? And there have been some not a lot, but some peer-reviewed studies to somewhat substantiate this. They kind of go right up to that line of saying this is a thing, and then they stop right there. So again, that's why I kind of say take that as you will. If we go right back over here, so the matrix is an illusion created by energy fields. Solid objects are really just energy contained in something like a force field. Okay? The programming to maintain the integrity of objects is extreme. This has to do, again, the mind control system. The outside surface of objects is maintained by rigidly controlled force fields. This is to prevent a loss of containment and the object from just dissipating. It's pretty much a holodeck. This is the best example I could probably give to you folks from this gentleman right here. In Star Trek, when they threw a holographic object out of the holodeck, and for those who don't know what the holodeck is in Star Trek, it was a room where they would go in the show to sort of just holograms would come up. You could, pretend you're on a beach, whatever, right? It immediately dispersed into energy. And for those that haven't seen Star Trek, there have been many scenes and episodes where the object in the holodeck, the hologram, is physically real, but sometimes they would throw an object outside of the holodeck in the show, and the object would just disappear. Like it would just look like code going into air or whatever, right? So we see here, in Star Trek, when they threw a holographic object out of the holodeck, it immediately dispersed into energy because there was no force field to contain that energy. It's just, folks, think of it like water in a jar. Without the jar, the water's there, but how's it going to get contained? It's just going to splat all over the floor. It's the exact same thing. In this example, the water being the information structures or energy that make up everything around us, truly. In the Matrix, I'm not saying this is fact, by the way, I'm just saying, as part of this proposal. In the Matrix, the force fields that shape objects are rigidly controlled to try to prevent that. There is a force, which is our subconscious mind, that is actively maintaining their shape, which I think, by the way, is why these beings, these ETs, biological or otherwise, do not want us to realize that we are a species that's been hit on the head with amnesia. We see here, that is the basics of how the Matrix creates objects. They aren't solid, they're just energy fields, but it's way more complicated than that. The Matrix is created by the subconscious mind and is run by an AI. When there is a glitch in the system or someone is defying the rules of the Matrix, the AI tries to put a stop to it. Again, this is what I mean when I say someone gets really close to something, unless the government puts a DEW on them, maybe they have a mental breakdown one day and they go crazy or something like this. It may not always be direct energy weapons from the government. This may be a part of it too. And apparently, the NRO and the National Reconnaissance Organization and the NSA are familiar with these programs. And when someone tries to raise their vibration, the AI notices and tries to throw negative energy in situations at them to try to put them in a negative state of mind. Because the Matrix is a negative energy farm, right? There's an energy field that tries to make the physical world seem physical when it isn't. Let me see here. This is important. There's also a grid system. Now, I want to say that this has been told to me before as well too. Again, not that I'm anyone of importance or significance, but someone of reputable credibility, at least in my opinion. So take that as you will. Truly, you don't have to believe me. There's also a grid system that runs through the planet. This is the thing that I've also been told separately as well. I've seen it a few times. It's just outside the visible light spectrum. It conducts energy throughout the planet. Important grid lines are called ley lines. The elite use the grid to conduct energy throughout the planet. They perform dark rituals on ley lines. And this, by the way, is not a conspiracy. I mean, look at the Bohemian Grove. It's a bunch of super rich human elites with hoodies on, paying, like, what, praising an owl or something? I don't know. They perform dark rituals on ley lines, and the energy is used to lower the vibration of the planet. This is also what creates duality. The AI uses the grid to make sure the negative and positive energies don't go too far out of balance. And even the negative dark forces know this too. Because if the world was total hell, then most people would drop dead and the dark forces could not feed off of the energy. If the world was paradise, the energy would be too high frequency for them, so the dark forces couldn't feed off of it. So it's maintained in a state of duality, so that there is just enough positive energy so that there isn't a huge decline in the population. Folks, if we look at the planet Earth, the globe, as like, even right now, as a string pull, and you're much larger than the planet. Let's just pretend for the sake of that example. And you're told, okay, as the controller of Earth, as this massive giant that you are, but the people on the planet can't see you, you have to make sure there's balance. So what would you do if you were looking at the Earth condensed, right? Wherever you pressed on the planet, an event, a good or bad event would occur. So, okay, this part of the planet, war. This part here, a little bit of happiness. This part over here, starvation. Do we not see that happening right now? Literally, Ukraine. The whole situation with the beep boops, everyone's happy around the world because the beep boop stuff is being dropped or lightened very heavily. But then all of a sudden you now got this other thing with Ukraine. And then you had the Super Bowl, right? The halftime show. That's a whole other thing we'll be covering very soon, right? But again, this could also substantiate what, again, people such as government people or whistleblowers have said. What if we're in the middle of the food chain? And we always thought we were the predator with at the top, but we're not, right? So we see here. So the matrix is literally just a bunch of energy fields. It has no solidity, and it is not physical, and atoms don't exist. If you try to observe an atom with an electron microscope, the AI would probably render one for you. But aside from that, they don't exist. So the matrix on Earth is pretty much a super advanced holodeck, right? But instead of being created by tech, it's fueled by our subconscious minds. So the world you think is real and solid is not real and is not remotely solid. It also says here, again, take that as you will. It's interesting because, again, Mr. Vallee seems to be on that same type of path, so to speak. But imagine if Jacques Vallee had said this stuff on Joe Rogan with James Fox when he was on a year and a half ago. It's too woo-woo for people, right? We have to keep in mind, guys, even for you folks on the stream, which I love all of you. Thank you so much for coming on. There's a lot of people that don't simply just cannot comprehend what we're looking at here, and that's no disrespect to them at all. It's just maybe they're simply not there. They need to realize some I don't want to use the term lower level because it's not fair for me to say who's progressively ahead of or behind or not. Everyone has got their own path, but sometimes it takes that. So apparently, when we drop dead biologically, there are entities that try to trick us into reincarnating. They show up disguised as people angels, guides, religious figures, God, maybe family too, I'm not sure. I've seen this in the Astral. But if you know what you're doing, they're pretty easy to deal with. So negative entities trick people into reincarnating and then use the matrix to control them so they can feed on our energy. So again, it's all here, guys. An illusion created by energy fields, all of this, right? And dense consensus reality run by AI. Allegedly, there is a much older AI that was built by our ancestors before we were knocked on the head with amnesia. I mean, Anunnaki, you name it, maybe the ones who even created us, that allegedly is realizing the imbalance, so to speak, on this planet. Now, again, that's just things I've been reading, things I've been told. Please take that as you will. But let's head back here. Let's jump to back to the steps we were on. Here we go. Sorry, the phenomenon. All right, here we are. So, A framework for scientific hypothesis is that on the UAP observations can be built on the identification of the 6 major layers of UAP effects. If we must formulate a view of the problem in a single statement, at this point, that statement will be: everything works as if UAPs were the product of a technology that integrates physical and psychic phenomenon and primarily affects cultural variables in our society through manipulation of physiological and psychological parameters in the witnesses. All right? The phenomenon is the product of a technology. During the observation, the UAP is a real physical material object. However, it appears to use either very clever deception or very advanced physical principles, resulting in the effects we have called anti-physical, which must eventually be reconciled with the laws of physics. The technology triggers psychic effects either purposely or as a side effect of its manifestations. These consciousness phenomenon are now too common to be ignored or relegated to the category of exaggerated or ill-observed facts. All of us who have investigated close-range sightings have become familiar with these effects. The purpose of the technology may be cultural manipulation, possibly but not necessarily under control of a form of non-human intelligence. This is again going back to the 1980s Ronald Reagan era, where the NSA allegedly had a very dark program going pertaining to this, in which case pertaining to abductions, to scare people, that government individuals that knew about the ET topic that wanted to come out. Apparently the NSA was given tech by the Orion Draco faction allegedly to abduct these individuals, scare the bejesus out of them. Let's see, in which case the physiological and psychological effects are a means to that end. But the parapsychologist with a Jungian framework may argue that human collective unconscious is also a potential source of such effects without the need to invoke alien intervention. All right, so now, let's see here. The incommensurability problem. Yeah, see, this is when it gets, okay, this is when it gets really neat. So, the above considerations bring us back to a discussion of the SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence paradigm. Many SETI workers now realize that we cannot be so presumptuous as to assume that ET cultures possessing a cognitive mismatch with us will behave as humans do in the 21st century. Scientifically, there's no reason to restrict them to radio-based communications and to exclude travel through interstellar space or the sending of automated probes. Let's see here. Incommensurability. The cognitive mismatch or incommensurability problem between human and ET cultures will guarantee that the latter will develop communication techniques other than radios. ET cultures may be sending radio and optical signals to Earth, but they may also be sending signals in a variety of other forms, such as holographic images, psychic or other consciousness-related signals, modulated neutrinos, gamma ray bursters. By the way, guys, I'm getting to a point here. Wormhole modulated starlight caustics, signals generated by gravitational lensing techniques, modulated X-rays, quantum teleported signals, or some quantum field theoretic effect. The incommensurability problem even applies to the problem of understanding UAP manifestations within the framework of the ETH. So, okay. I highlighted here X-rays. Let's take a look at this. Watch this, guys. Inventor of X-ray. Let me see here. This X-ray machine. Röntgen, I believe. It was Röntgen in 1895, if I'm not mistaken. Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. We're going to make a couple connections here, guys. So, Wilhelm Röntgen, okay, by the way, related to Bill de Blasio, whose real last name before he changed it was Wilhelm. So, again, I actually, yeah, that's interesting. But anyways, point being, he invented the, what we now know to be the X-ray machine. Now, I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm not a physicist, so please forgive me if I don't explain this correctly. The point is that as long as we grasp the concepts here, folks. So allegedly, Mr. Röntgen, after he invented the X-ray machine and things like this, and as the years went by and he got, prizes, he filed his patents, the whole thing, he then found a more, I don't want to use an incorrect word here, but something stronger than the X-ray spectrum, so to speak. I don't know exactly what he did, please forgive me, but he extended it beyond the point of what we now know to be the typical X-ray machine. And what was then discovered was something called the J phenomenon. Now, the J phenomenon is this right over here. Okay, not in hypertension. The J. See, this is exactly. They make it so hard to find here. There's only a couple of them. This is not to do with the body. The J phenomenon was shoot. Anyways, the point being was that essentially this gentleman here was having a conversation on the record with some journalists, state media, and he talked about how basically this J phenomenon could actually produce what we now know to be anti-gravity, but the transcript of that particular part of the conversation was excluded deliberately. But obviously at the time, about 100 years back, who's going to notice, right? You remove a sentence from a piece of paper and you truly, as the printing press, you control all of it, so there you go. Quick little, interesting side note, so to speak, in that perspective, right? So I wanted to bring that up. Let's see. At the core of the incommensurability problem is the view that no intelligent species can understand reality without making certain methodological choices, and that these choices may vary from civilization to civilization. If ETs and UAP entities have different biologies and live in considerably different environments from humans, they may well have different goals for their science, radically different criteria for evaluating the success of their science, all of this, right? Now, let me see here. Let me enter. Once the formation of the message. Yeah, this is really they talk about communicating via symbols, things like that, which conclusion, modern engineering, all of this. Yeah, so basically we see here, Coupier and Fritas suggest that ETs and UAP visiting Earth would find it necessary to hide themselves from our detection mechanisms until they have assessed our technological layer or potential threat and hazards. They would imply an adaptive multi-layer risk program to avoid danger, which I'm bringing this up, guys, because people say, to be fair, if they're so advanced, how is it that, they crash and, accidents happen and things like that? Well, if we just basically, even looking at it from a human paradigm, looking at just, probability and mathematics, no matter how advanced one would get, hypothetically, technologically, or you name it, accidents do happen. But I get it. There's a lot of them on this planet, a lot of crashes that are covered up. That, interestingly enough, was apparently it has to do with something called gifting fields, which, again, Jacques Vallee coined the term gifting fields, basically where he believes, or he has a proposal rather, that these beings are crashing some of their craft on purpose. Sometimes with people, with beings in them, sometimes not, in order to give us tech. Again, to what extent is that faction doing this for good or worse reasons is hard to say. Some say that these gifting fields are, again, this is when it gets, out there for some, but when, the Galactic Federation is trying to sort of recruit the good guys, if you will, that have been working for the wrong side, so to speak. But that's a whole other conversation, because to me, at least, you start thinking, okay, so if perception is a whole new paradigm and all that, who's to say what's good or bad? And anyways, yeah, so, but we see here, however, that the question then becomes, to what extent are these effects evidence of a purposeful action of the operators? To answer this question and to test more fully the hypothesis that UAP phenomenon are both physical and psychic in nature, we need much better investigations, a great upgrading of data quality, right? And a more informed analysis not only of the object being described, but of the impact of the observation on the witnesses and their social environment. So, again, right, it's... they're basically describing what, in 2003, what has now come to be today, essentially. And they're using the same approach. I don't think it's a coincidence or a fluke. And if it is, wow, that's pretty big. But that they're using this exact same approach. I think Dr. Eric Davis and Jacques Vallee have been behind this in more ways than we may realize, right? But if we jump over here to, let me see, thinkaboutit.docs.com, I wanted to cover this, the 1966 Tully saucer nest over here. Now, it's interesting because saucer nests are very, very, I don't know how to say it, tricky to discuss in a certain way, because it's almost as if they don't just leave a physical implant on the ground. These saucer nests also seem to leave a radiological, I don't want to say esoteric, sorry, frequential and, what's the word, vibrational state of alteration within just the place that the craft landed on, right? So, let's see here. And then in some other cases, these saucer nests don't even seem to appear in some cases. So again, that could be the result of some type of species, by the way, and not being as advanced as others. We, again, see, the thing is with approaching this whole concept, guys, is that if they talk about, you know, breaking our paradigm of human thinking, holy crap, then it's everything. How do we even have a focal point of not just reality, of understanding what is all around us? Because if you don't have a focal point, I know it sounds silly, but then you really have shadow people, you know, wolves, you know, humanoid wolves, as I think was termed from, you know, the Skinwalker, all that stuff. You have all of that, witches. I mean, it, and then we have to think as well with, you know, what is magic per se, right? So again, now this is interesting. The prominent schools of thought on the crop circle formations adopted the 1966 Tully incident as a classic example of their perceived explanations for the circle complexes. Their claims about the relevance of the Tully incident as the progenitor or a classic example of the currently perceived crop circle phenomenon were flawed and generally unfounded. Doug and Dave, the notorious circle hoaxers, also cited the Tully incident as the inspiration of their crop circle creation escapades. Instead of being an example of a wind vortex effect, spaceship landing site, the result of occult paranormal forces, plasma vortex, evidence, or hoaxed saucer nest, the Pedley nest is a remarkable example of a UFO physical trace case. Again, not to split hairs here, but you see here, the choice of UFO is deliberate in that an unidentified phenomenon was apparently involved, and a definitive explanation currently eludes us, right? And again, constantly eluding. It seems, again, going back to this thing of the zone of proximal development, it's like actually, this is probably a better one. Yeah, here we go. This is what I would say. Oh, no, I don't want to download the thing. Okay, well, yeah, okay. Whatever. It's like this is us in the yellow. And this blue here is all the stuff that we as a species or society consider to be like just total gibberish, like ridiculousness. And then this purple here is what I guess you could say the ETs, the benevolent ones. And I say that carefully because who am I to say if they're benevolent or not? But they come in and they try and bring the horse to water. You know, they try and bring us to past this purple point, but we're not there yet. I think communities like ours are getting there, but I mean, this is what Vallee means when there's a force that messes with us in very, very mysterious ways, right? In one other way, for those that want a better example or a stronger example, 9/11. It created, you know, mass consciousness redirection, all of that, right? So, sorry, where was I here? The J-curve phenomenon. Yeah, there's the DARPA, the vanishing stuff. There's that. Yeah, we covered that. Here we are, the saucer nest. Excuse me. Others trace anomalies about 6 feet to the north of the nest. By the way, I want to point something out. These saucer nests always have some something interesting occurring with them as it pertains to, at least if we measure in how we term feet, miles, kilometers, the number 6 is always reoccurring in the cases that have ominous feeling experiences. So take that as you will, right? It's interesting because it's possible that in addition to the esoteric angle of, the number 6, numerology and all of that, there is a geometric side of things that many would refer to as, sacred geometry, so to speak. So we see here about 6 feet to the north of the nest, a rectangular patch of the swamp couch grass, approximately 5 by 6 feet had been clipped at water level and pulled out completely. A further interesting anomaly was found by Christine Ronland, whose husband helped Pedley with crop fertilizing. These were farmers. She came across some ground markings that resembled curious tracks in loose plowed soil of an adjoining paddock between Pedley's banana palms. This is interesting. They led from the direction of the lagoon area and extended a short distance into the plowed field. They were shaped like a teardrop, pointed on one end and rounded at the other. Each were about 3 to 4 inches in length and about 2 inches across at their widest point. They were spaced out at about 12-inch intervals and in a straight line. Notice the geometric consistencies and, I guess you could say, precisions behind whether structures that are designed by ancient humans or non-humans, by UAP experiences, by poltergeist experiences, by the way. Now, the reason I think, or I would say probably no rather, which I hardly ever say, that poltergeist activities are not nearly delved into as much is because, of course, who are you going to call if you have a poltergeist activity in your house, right? But if the government brought out the secret tech they have to measure such quote-unquote anomalies, which are not really anomalies, I think they would be able to literally, geometrically, and mathematically, to some extent at least, explain paranormal phenomenon in certain senses. So, anyways, we are coming on to what the hour and a half point. I would like to ask the audience. We are now going to play some video games, but we are going to be listening to a nice interview in the background. So let's see here. Let's ask the crowd here. I was thinking Graham Hancock or something of the sort, but what do you guys want to listen to in the background while we play some we have some fun? Last time, about a month and a half ago, we listened to, I think it was Alex Collier. So let's see here what you guys would be interested in. Let's see. We'll give you guys a little bit of time to put in the comments here, and then we'll start her up. What should we? Lloyd Pye. A real ghost is the closest thing we have to time travel. Oh, cool. I see. I think I see where you're leading with that. Okay, hold on. Robert Seffer, Graham Hancock, where he talks about the ice bridge in Alaska. Nathan, we're gonna probably be playing Fortnite. I don't have that many games on here. I gotta get some more games. Jordan Maxwell. Oh man, there's so many great ones here. I know, Pepe. I'm trying to just balance it out with everyone. The plane going in circles phenomenon. Yes, it's SCP. I've seen it. Yes. Yeah. By the way, for those, I just want to say a very special random thank you for those that have been, supporting the channel for so long, even if you're not on the Patreon, but you've been on the streams. I mean, I noticed, guys. Thank you. I see the usernames, the ones that have been here for since almost the beginning, almost. So truly, guys, thank you a ton. Let's see here. Let's see, game. Oh, Atomic Heart, BioShock, Fallout. Hold on. Okay, so let's start with Graham Hancock, and we'll jump around a little bit. So let's close all of this. Let us head to this right over here. Let us go to YouTube. You guys just let me know if the volume of the video and all that stuff is okay. Actually, hold on. Let's go to thank you so much, guys. Truly appreciate it so much. Robert Seffer. Okay, hold on. Robert Sepper or Seffer. Is there anything specific? Let's see here. Hold on. Okay, so we'll go Graham first, and then we'll go Sepper. That's what we'll do. And then Pepe, I promise you, brother, next stream, which we'll do I think I want to do another one this week. We will do that. Oh, Paul, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it. Okay, so let's do Graham Hancock Atlantis. I guess that's the Is there a certain podcast, guys? You want to do the one where he goes on Joe Rogan, or?
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all...
Even in 1995, the...
Okay, hold on. So let's go Joe Rogan. You know what? Let's just play this one for the heck of it, because he covers all this, I believe. Let me know, guys, if the volume is good.
Here we go. And boom, we're live.
Again, just let me know about the volume, guys, before I start up playing the game.
Graham, great to see you again.
Nice to be back with you, Joe.
And we were just talking about your new book, America Before, that there's two versions of it. There's one version, and then there's a newer version that's a Barnes & Noble version that's specific to Barnes & Noble that has an extra whole chapter in it.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and so they can get that at Barnes & Noble. I'm just trying to keep bookstores alive, man. They're on the way out.
I think it's really important, and that's one of the reasons that I did.
Hold on, can we get copyrighted for this? I don't think we can. Too loud? Okay. But can we get... Gosh darn it, hold on a second. I don't think we can get copyrighted, can we? No. Loud? Okay. Thanks, guys.
Did this because I had finished the book, and then Barnes & Noble came to me through my publishers and said they would like to do a special edition of the book, but in order to do that, I needed to write them some extra material. And I had a lot of material that I hadn't put in the book, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity to put that out there.
Yeah, Phil, that's time to play games. Yeah, we learn a little bit, we have some fun, we chat, we talk
Beautiful.
about it, and then we do this. So let's get into it.
If people want that, it's a little bit different, and there's a small gold square.
Okay, so first of all, my website, grahamhancock.com, has a page about America Before, and the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is there, as well as the link to the standard edition, which is on...
Oh, sorry, guys. It'll keep playing shortly.
Amazon and iTunes and all kinds of...
Would it have to be Rogan himself to strike it? Because if that's the case, I doubt he'll do it. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. Okay, volume's perfect. Great. Okay, so you know what? Screw it. If we get a strike... whatever. I don't think... My only concern is if the YouTube algorithm goes out of its way, but I don't think it will.
All kinds of other places. So...
Oh, what the heck? Why won't it play?
grahamhancock.com and the America Before page, the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is right there.
All right, there it is. So how is this, before we even get into the book, what is it?
Go to Talks and Events.
That's interesting. Why does it keep pausing itself? Hold on, we'll figure this out, guys. Is it because it thinks that it's the settings of the game here, which I could have sworn I fixed this a long time ago. Music, no. Sound effects. Yeah, no, it should be good. Why is it doing that?
Okay, we're on the Graham Hancock website.
No, go to books. Go to books. Go to America Before.
Bam.
There
it is.
Go to United States. You can see Amazon, Barnes, and there's Barnes & Noble.
Special edition.
Special edition. Click on that.
There you go. And then the ebook as well. The
ebook is available. The audiobook, which I read myself, is available there. And then if you scroll down, oops, that shouldn't be there.
It's damn pop-ups.
Sons
of bitches. I am so happy you read it yourself. I get angry when someone else...
Hold on. I'm going to lower it a little more. Let me know if this is good, guys.
Reads someone who I'm like, come on, he can talk.
Yeah, I enjoy reading my books myself, and what I've learned from feedback I get from audiences at presentations is people like me doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
It's just weird when someone else is talking in your voice. Like, hey man, I know you're not Graham.
You know that I write fiction as well as nonfiction.
Yeah.
And the one thing I can't read is my fiction.
Really?
Because fiction requires accents. You really need an actor to read a fiction book who can get into the different characters. But for a nonfiction book like America Before, it's very straightforward. effort for me just to read it myself.
I agree. I'm a tremendous Stephen King fan, but when I read Stephen King's books where he reads them or listen to them when he reads them, they're terrible. He's awful at it.
I don't think a novelist should read their own novels. I think that's a job for an actor. Oddly enough, I've just been reading Stephen King's Dark Tower series. Very near the end of the 7th volume of that.
Yeah, I'm just a giant fan of his, but
Me
man,
too.
when he reads it like he's just reading it.
Yeah.
It's like, oof, this is rough. It's hard to get behind. Anyway, America Before.
So there's
Give us
on the website. There's details about the book. There's a page where there are links to the book, and also the other thing I would like to take this opportunity to mention is I'm in America and Canada for the next 7 weeks.
Oh my gosh, you guys are killing me here. Some of you guys too loud, too low. I just put it up a tad. And thank you for the compliments, guys, so much. Oh, thanks, Phil. Well, I don't want to. Yeah, I mean, this is what I do, right? I don't want to get taken down.
And I'm going to be doing something like 25 presentations in something like 20 American cities, and then 3 Canadian cities in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. And
Excellent.
That's all on the talks and events page of my website. So if anybody wants to come along and meet this old man in person, I'll be doing those events.
And are you doing these at theaters, and do you allow Q&As? Like how does this work?
Absolutely, I allow Q&As. I encourage that. I feel as an author that, frankly speaking, I'm nothing without my audience. I owe my audience, my readers, big time. And what I try to do at events is to give back as much as I can. So if people want to take pictures with me, I am absolutely up for that. I don't understand why anybody would want to do that, but it's fun. It's kind of fun. And when people want to come to the desk where I'm signing and ask me personal questions, I'm ready to do that. Sometimes on the British book tour, which I just finished, I was behind in the event space for 4 hours after the event finished.
Wow.
Signing and taking pictures. But it's a joy. It's a really opportunity for me to interact with the people who actually make my work matter. So
That's fantastic.
Hey, you guys want to hear something really crazy, so to speak? And Phil, awesome, first time. Yeah, see, this part of the stream, we kind of just, lay back a little bit. We'll be doing about an hour of this. About an hour from now, we'll probably call it. But just to give you an idea of how things are going globally, I live in Canada, right? I went shopping today, and normally some meat that I usually purchase is, $15-20, right? It was $55-60. Like, insane, guys, insane. Anyways.
Fantastic. Beautiful. So what inspired this? I know there's always been, you, first of all, we should just say, for people who don't know, you have been at the front of the line for decades, talking about these lost civilizations. And from reading your work, I think I first read your work in the 90s. You exposed me to a lot of these, what were at the time controversial ideas that have now been substantiated by actual evidence, particularly Göbekli Tepe and the all the water erosion stuff on the Sphinx, and I've since had Dr. Robert Jacques on the podcast to talk about that as well. But all this stuff was at one point very controversial, and now far less.
Yes.
Whatever traditional academics and traditional historians that are trying to, I guess it's archaeologists, that were trying to resist, they've let go a lot of that. They've had to with things like Göbekli Tepe.
They've had to because the evidence has overwhelmed them. And Göbekli Tepe is an excellent example. Prior to the discovery and excavation of Göbekli Tepe, which is a site in Anatolia in Turkey, it was the very firm view of archaeologists that there had been no megalithic architecture anywhere on Earth. And when I say megalithic, I mean literally big stones, stone circles, huge constructions, nothing like that before at the very, very earliest 6,000 years ago. And they would point to sites in, for example, Malta, a site called Gigantia, which is about 5,800 years old. That's the oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And they could understand how that was because these were agricultural societies. They generated surpluses. You could free up people who could become specialists in architecture, in astronomy, in geometry, and they could apply their skills to the construction of these sites. But what they never considered possible was that a society that was hunter-gatherers would have created a gigantic megalithic site. And then suddenly Göbekli Tepe is discovered. It dates to 11,600 years ago. It's more than 5,000 years older than the supposedly oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And it is in a center where there had been no previous evidence of agriculture. But the moment Göbekli Tepe appears, agriculture appears as well. And this is just something that's really hard for archaeology to explain. They've suddenly got 5,000 years of missing history that they've just never taken into account. And what I see them doing is largely avoiding the problem rather than getting to grips with it directly. And in fact, there have been a great number of changes in the last 20 years, which have worked generally in favor of the arguments that I've proposed.
Well, I'm so happy for you because I know that for a long time you were out there on your own with a lot of these theories.
Very much so, and also subjected to the most blistering and deeply unpleasant criticism from the archaeological.
I see it. 2QIK4U Games. I appreciate it. I'm going to look into it after the stream. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, man.
Fraternity and from their friends in the media, like how dare this journalist propose that history might be different or that we might have a forgotten chapter in the human story. It was regarded almost as offensive that I would put this material out there, and archaeologists felt it was their responsibility to show the public that I was full of shit, and that was the whole way my work was greeted, and to a certain extent still is greeted by archaeologists. But things have changed. Central to my work was the notion of a global cataclysm, roughly 12,500, 12,800 years ago. It made sense to me in 1995 when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, but there was no compelling evidence for a global cataclysm then. All the evidence seemed to point to that time and a massive global event. And then from 2007 onwards, more than a decade after I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, we get a group of more than 60 major scientists who are seriously proposing that the Earth was hit by multiple fragments of a giant comet 12,800 years ago, and that this caused a huge rise in sea level and extinctions of megafaunas. They are not saying that it also wiped out a lost advanced civilization of prehistory. I'm saying that.
Yes.
But what has
also, guys, this is the last time I'll keep pausing you. Please forgive me, but I just wanted to bring up, any of you guys live in any places where it's cold more often than not throughout the year, but you haven't had much sun and it looks like they're spraying stuff? Because where I am over here, holy crap, I got to be careful that YouTube doesn't nick me, but there's some very interesting things. Like, I haven't had sun here in at least 2 months. A military base right over here. Granted, I'm in the middle of nowhere, but still, like... And this is the longest, by the way, I've had a sinus infection in my life. Usually 3-4 days it's gone. This has been 8 days now.
Changed is that we now have compelling, hard scientific evidence. I'm not saying every scientist accepts it. It's the nature of science to dispute findings, but we have a group of 60 major figures who have seriously proposed this in all the leading mainstream journals, and it's changed the balance of power in this argument, because one thing that they used to say is Hancock can't be right because there was no global cataclysm 12 or 13,000 years ago. Well, now we know there was, and there are various explanations for it, so that's moved things along. And the other thing that's changed a lot is the attitude of the man in the street to authority. That has changed. Back in the 90s, authority figures were the gatekeepers. They controlled everything. If an authority figure in a discipline like archaeology said, Hancock is completely wrong, he's made all this stuff up, that would generally be believed, not by everybody, but by the majority of people. Today, to have a mainstream authority figure say that to me is actually an advantage, because people are so distrustful of authority, and rightly so, because we've been lied to by authority figures in all fields for so long. Wow. The bullshit has been so enormous that people are finally waking up. But we can't trust what authority figures say. And
I think we can thank the internet for that.
We can thank the internet for that, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the more recent evidence of a crater that they just discovered, like fairly recently.
Greenland.
Yes, enormous crater.
It's an enormous crater. It's 18 miles wide. It had not been discovered before because it's under ice. It's under a lot of ice. At the end of the Ice Age, Greenland was one area which never lost its ice cover completely, whereas North America, everywhere north of Minnesota, was covered in ice a mile, sometimes 2 miles deep. Europe, the same, Northern Europe. But Greenland kept its ice, whereas the other parts of the world lost their ice at the end of the Ice Age. And what's interesting about Greenland is there's already evidence of comet impact in Greenland, which goes back to papers published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013, that they found what are called impact proxies in Greenland. In other words, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, and evidence of a lot of platinum and iron was found in a layer in the ice dated to 12,800 years ago. But the next development, and you're absolutely right, and this was just a few months ago, was the discovery of this humongous crater in Greenland and evidence that it was caused by an iron impactor of some kind. Now, dating of it, I would be irresponsible to say that that crater definitely dates to 12,800 years ago, because the work has not been done to prove that yet. But what I can say, and what the specialists who have explored and excavated the crater are saying, is that it's recent. They can say for sure that it happened during the last ice age. Under the crater, is nothing but massively disturbed and destroyed and completely wrecked ice from the ice age, from the Pleistocene. Above it is smooth, perfect ice from our epoch, which is called the Holocene, which began about 11,600 years ago. So all the evidence suggests that this crater dates to that period between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, but to absolutely confirm that, more work needs to be done. But it's part of a growing pattern. The Younger Dryas impact scientists, they call themselves, they call this the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And it's because there was a period in the Earth's geological history that geologists call the Younger Dryas, which lasted for 1,200 years, from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. It's a very mysterious period. We see all the megafauna dying off suddenly and rapidly. We see rises in sea level. We see a huge collapse in global temperature. It's a cataclysmic epoch, and what is becoming clearer and clearer is that the evidence that a comet was behind it is extremely strong. And as more and more evidence comes in, we realize how widespread it was. So they found evidence of the impacts as far south as Antarctica now. Previously, they were focused very much on North America. Now, as far south as Antarctica, as far
Project 8200. I'll write it down. Thank you. It's redacted. Okay. Project 8200. Thank you for that recommendation, HC.
East to Syria. This was truly a global event, and it changed the world. And I think, and it's my case, that it wiped our memory of a previous episode of human civilization, that right at the epicenter of this cataclysm was a civilization that we would regard as advanced, not a simple hunter-gatherer civilization, which was utterly wiped out in this cataclysmic event.
And I should say, for anyone who's really fascinated right now, please maybe pause and go listen to the two that you did with Randall Carlson,
yes,
where it really goes into depth about the impact, the evidence of these impacts, yes, the evidence of the very quick demise of the Ice Age, and what may have resulted in all these floods that you read about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that you read about in Noah's Ark, and that all these things are probably tales of stories that people pass down from generation to generation that survived this time.
Yeah, because we now know that at that time, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, truly global cataclysmic events involving rapid rises in sea level did occur, and suddenly the worldwide tradition of a global flood stops being just a myth and starts being a memory, an account of real events. It's been my privilege to work very closely with Randall Carlson.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Randall is absolutely amazing. He is a total genius. He's also a gentle giant and such a kind, generous, spirited person. It's a joy to work with him. And every minute spent with him is an education. I had the privilege of traveling across the Channel Scablands in Washington State with Randall, and seeing things through his eyes really opened my eyes to the scale of this disaster. You know, you could look at these giant boulders called glacial erratics, and they just look odd sitting there in the landscape. But when you really consider how they got there, that they got there in icebergs the size of oil tankers, that were carried on floods that were at least 500 up to 1,000 feet deep, that were tearing through the channeled scablands, literally ripping the landscape apart. Then the icebergs would ground on Vallee sides, the flood waters would recede, the icebergs would be left, they're giant icebergs. And as they melted away, they revealed the rocks that they had enchained that were caught up within them, and they're scattered all over the landscape. And you look at that and you think anything that was underneath that 12,800 years ago is gone completely. There can't be anything left of it at all. Utterly, utterly destroyed.
And I would encourage people that are interested in this to please watch the YouTube videos of it, because Randall provides all sorts of video and photographic evidence where you can take a look at the landscape and you get a perspective of how immense this destruction was.
Yeah, it's really important to see that, because it's easy enough to talk about floods and cataclysms, but actually to see its effect on the landscape directly it has an emotional impact. I felt emotional traveling across the Channel Scablands, realizing that this was the heart of an event that changed the world completely. And the evidence continues to build. I have, in America before, I've not gone over old ground that I went over in Magicians of the Gods and that we covered in the various interviews and podcasts, in which it's really a good idea that people take a look at. But what I have done is added the new information published since 2015, which further supports the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the notion that multiple fragments of a giant comet hit the Earth and created an absolute global catastrophe.
So what was the motivation behind creating this book, America Before?
It's a curious mixture of things. I have been exploring the possibility of a lost civilization for more than 25 years. That was the essence of my book, Fingerprints of the Gods, that was published in 1995, that there has been a huge forgotten episode in human history. I continued to follow that in a series of other books, and by the time I got to 2002, when I published a book called Underworld, that followed 7 years of scuba diving on continental shelves, looking for structures that were submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, I really felt I'd done it. I felt I'd walked the walk. I'd put out to the public a massive body of information, and I thought my role in this is over, and I can breathe a sigh of relief because it's hot in this particular kitchen, and I can go do something else. And I ended up writing a book about psychedelics. I ended up writing Supernatural: Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, about the role of psychedelics in the origins of the human story. But then new information started to come out that touched on the lost civilization idea, and I couldn't just stand by and ignore that information. That's why I published Magicians of the Gods in 2015. And then, as I was researching that book, I became aware of something I hadn't realized before, that there's a mass of new information from the Americas, specifically from the Americas, which completely rewrites the story of human history, that the Americas have been misrepresented for a very long time by archaeology. And archaeologists will be annoyed with me for saying that. They have a way of forgetting their own errors, of saying, oh, well, we knew that all along. It wasn't the case. But the fact of the matter remains that for the best part of 50 years, from the 1960s through until about 2010, American archaeology was locked in a dogma that they actually had a name for, which was Clovis first. That they invented a name for a culture. They called them the Clovis culture. We don't know what they called themselves. They were hunter-gatherers. They first appear in the archaeological record 13,400 years ago, and they vanish from the archaeological record 12,600 years ago. And for a very long time, it was maintained adamantly that these were the first Americans, that no human being touched the soil of the Americas until 13,400 years ago. Just animals, but no human beings present at all. And any archaeologist who attempted to dispute that dogma, and I use the word deliberately, there should be no room for dogma in science, but any archaeologist who challenged that would face severe problems with his or her career. They would be mocked and humiliated at conferences, like an archaeologist called Jacques Cinq-Mars from Canada, who excavated in the Yukon. Humiliated at conferences, insulted, accused of making stuff up. Their research funding would be withdrawn. Basically, to challenge Clovis first was the end of your archaeological career. So naturally, very few archaeologists wanted to challenge Clovis first.
What was this gentleman in the Yukon? What was his
He's called
situation?
Jacques Cinq-Mars. And interestingly, the Smithsonian, just in 2017, did a big kind of mea culpa, a big admission about this, that everybody had got things wrong, that
is
Jacques
the most
Cinq-Mars had
anxiety
been
I've had all day.
ruined by the Clovis First lobby,
Where is this
but
guy?
he'd been right all along. The site he excavated in the Yukon was re-excavated in 2017, and every single thing he said was correct, even though they had just sneered at him.
In what
and
year
dismissed him.
was he? What year did
He was excavating in the 1980s and the 1990s.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's still alive. Yeah.
Is he
yeah.
bitter?
Well, I think he's vindicated, you know, and it's kind of nice to be vindicated.
Yes.
That there's almost a place in folklore for the for the individual who is scorned and humiliated, you know, by others, but who turns out to be right, and he was right. But my point about this is that what it meant was, since it was the dogma that Clovis was first, that the oldest dates were 13,400 years ago, there seemed to be no logic to archaeologists in digging deeper. You know how it is with archaeology, that the upper levels are the youngest, and the deeper you go, the older it gets. That's why we say upper Paleolithic for the late Ice Age and lower Paleolithic for the late Stone Age and lower for the older Stone Age. And the feeling was no need to dig below the Clovis layer, because we already know that there were no human beings there before that. And then a few archaeologists, I've mentioned Jacques Cinq-Mars, but another is Al Goodyear from the University of South Carolina, who excavated a site called Topper in South Carolina. Now Topper is an incredibly rich Clovis site. It's full of their tools, their points. They made these special flint points that were used as arrowheads and spears. A great Clovis site. He finished excavating the Clovis level, and then he did something that was supposed not to be done. He decided to dig deeper, and he carried on digging down, and there was a layer of about 1.5 meters of barren soil, and then beneath that, more human artifacts. And they finally date those back to more than 50,000 years ago. And then in 2017, published in Nature by Tom Desmarais, who's the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and a bunch of other very high-level paleontologists, published in Nature magazine, evidence for human presence in
I was just basically saying I've never had this much anxiety playing this game in my life.
North America 130,000 years ago. Now, this has really put the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, if humans were present in North America 130,000 years ago, and archaeologists have been telling us for 50 years that they were only present from 13,000 years ago, that's 10 times as long that we've had humans in North America capable of doing stuff, and the archaeological dogma has prevented any search for what they were doing until very recently.
What was the evidence from 130,000 years ago?
Okay, so it's not let me be clear about this, because this is something that is often misrepresented in my views. It is not the evidence for an advanced civilization that we find 130,000 years ago in America. The evidence that we find is evidence for human presence. And what they were doing was very much Stone Age stuff. It's a mastodon. It's a mastodon skeleton that was excavated. It was actually found by accident during road construction near San Diego. And an archaeologist was attached to the road construction crew and immediately stopped construction. And they investigated it thoroughly. And what they found was so much dynamite in the early 1990s when they found it that they decided not to publish at the time. Because what they found was evidence that those mastodon bones had been cracked open by human beings using tools, and that the marrow had been extracted. That one tusk had been left standing upright in the ground and another had been left beside it. That a femur of the animal had been taken away completely from the site. And there was assemblages of instruments that were used to smash and break the bones. And the conclusion of the team was that only one kind of creature could have done that work using tools on a mastodon, and that's human beings. That's classic human behavior. So this sets the goalposts in a totally different place. Suddenly we have to consider that humans have been in America for 130,000 years. We already know that a dogmatic approach of archaeology has rather refused to look at anything older than 13,000 years ago. And what it does is it generates an engine of demand that we need to be looking at those missing 100,000 plus years. We need to be looking at it hard. Of course, the immediate reaction has not been to go looking for stuff in the other 100,000 years. Most archaeologists have responded responded by saying, this is impossible. It can't be so. But that's precisely what they said to Jacques Cinq-Mars, who said that humans were in Bluefish Caves in the Yukon 25,000 years ago. And it's precisely what they said to Al Goodyear, who said humans had been at Topper 50,000 years ago. And they were both right. And I believe that Tom Desmarais and his team, you don't get a big article published in Nature unless it's already pretty solidly based and pretty much peer reviews. It has produced a reaction. I would be wrong to say that it's universally accepted. It's very much challenged, but it's intriguing.
What is the challenge?
The challenge fundamentally comes from we archaeologists know that there were no human beings in the Americas that far back. To put it in perspective, it's about...
Favorite game ever? Batman, the Arkham series, for me personally.
60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Europe. It's about 60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Australia.
And this is just evidence of the first human beings.
Yes.
We have to point out how difficult it is to find evidence of human beings.
It's extremely difficult to find. You know, sometimes we imagine that archaeologists are working with masses of skeletal material. No, they're not. They're not. I mean, this is one of the ironies. The whole Clovis first dogma, you would think that they had masses of material to work with. They did have the tools, but in terms of skeletal remains, just one. Just one single skeletal remain from that period.
Now, one of the things that Michael Shermer had sent me was this dispute that perhaps the bones had been cracked open by the excavation material.
Yeah,
by the excavation machines.
I saw Michael's email last night, and I appreciate that Michael wants to continue to engage with this subject, and that's his job. He's a professional skeptic, and it's his role to do so. But what he misses out, it's true that a new paper has been published, which raises questions over the what's called the Cerruti Mastodon site, which is the site that Tom Desmarais at San Diego Natural History Museum excavated.
Can you guys hear me better?
And what's interesting, since Michael took the trouble to write the questions, can I just read you something that I responded to on this?
Sure.
Which is that...
Just do it into the microphone, though.
Yeah. Basically, this paper
I think.
was in no way a refutation of the original paper in Nature. As a matter of fact, the gentleman who wrote that paper never even looked at the archaeological remains that are now in the San Diego Natural History Museum. What he based it on is reference, I'm quoting from the abstract of the paper itself, reference to a freeway right-of-way map and construction plans, contemporary road building practices, and work site photographs available on the internet. In other words, the site was not visited. They simply looked at secondary references. They did not look at the archaeological material, and they ignored the entire argument of Tom Desmarais and his colleagues, who had already addressed that issue.
They didn't look at the bones?
They did not look at the bones. When you break a fresh bone, it has a characteristic kind of spiral fracture that does not happen when you break a fossilized bone. And Tom Desmarais and his team specifically ruled out road-making machinery as responsible for this breaking pattern, because they actually carried out experiments on modern elephants, deceased elephants, and they broke their bones, and the kind of fracture that you get in a fresh green bone is completely different from the kind of fracture you get in a fossilized bone. So unfortunately, this paper pays no attention to that. It just looks at road plans and says there was road work there. It must have been done by road work. I think it's very sloppy, very weak, and it's certainly not the answer. We can expect ongoing debate, and that is healthy, but this is not a strong case at all.
So this points to the first evidence that we found. And is there any effort underway to try to uncover more evidence that from a similar time period?
Well, I'm going to cite Tom Desmarais, the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum. That's what he would like to see. He makes the point to me. I interview him. I spent a day with him at the Natural History Museum. He was very generous with his time. I did an extended interview, and I quote from it in America before. And his wish is that archaeologists, instead of spending all their time trying to find ways to dismiss and get rid of his findings, his wish is that they would spend a little bit of that time looking at deposits older than 13,400 years, and even being willing to go back as far as 130,000 years. That's would be a proper scientific response. Here is a thorough body of work put forward by a very senior group of scientists who hesitated before they published it. They had the information back in the 1990s, but it wasn't until refined dating techniques later than in the 21st century that they finally were sure what they had, and that they published it in Nature in 2017. It's an important study, and I think what's going to happen is that we're going to find much more evidence of a very ancient human presence in the Americas, and that's what Tom Demeray thinks as well. And as he points out, if we don't look, then we're never going to find. If we allow dogma to stop us looking and saying, oh, it's impossible that humans were in the Americas 130,000 years ago, so we won't bother to look, what a failure of science that is. And to spend all the time instead trying to get rid of the evidence that doesn't fit the current paradigm.
But it's so fascinating that just this fortuitous discovery during a construction site could change the way people perceive things. And
Yes.
you've got to wonder how much of that stuff is I mean, how deep did they have to go to find these mastodon bones?
Well, so this is a road cut that's
Yeah.
being made. So those would be pretty deep down, 10, 15 feet down. The grader is going through and flattening them. It varies from place to place depending on soil deposition, the stratification of the soil. But what the key point is that what you need to do is go deeper than 13,400 years ago, and you need to do so with dedication and vigor and with some kind of funding. And at the moment, archaeology doesn't see the point of that. If the paper in Nature by Tom Demeray was alone, if there were no
Notice the things that Graham's speaking of in terms of how, like, peer-reviewed journals won't look at certain proposals, and if they do, they don't even go to the actual site of the archaeological dig and whatnot. Notice, guys, I got to be careful because of it's YouTube, and I don't want them to nick the stream, but notice that's exactly how they're attempting to stigmatize and sort of play off any type of alternative approach to the beep boop with what's happening in the world right now. So, again,
nothing else than that, I wouldn't place so much trust in it. But I've spent a lot of time during the researching of this book with archaeologists who did
Assassin's Creed, there's someone in our Patreon community, Rena, thank you so much. There's certain clips, if you play the audio back, yes, I would agree, Mason, that Assassin's Creed is a whole other creature in its own, yeah. Whether it's with respects to drop feeding, all of it.
did dig deeper. And what those archaeologists all confirm is that there have been human beings in the Americas for tens of thousands of years. And it's not surprising that can be pushed back to 130,000 years ago, because part of the argument about...
Sorry, last time. Alexis, yes, actually, I can say this. Michael Sala and the show will be doing a collaboration in March time. I'm just going to leave it at that. But yes, yeah. I actually have seen James Gillian. Yeah, fantastic work.
About the peopling of the Americas has to do with a place that we now call the Bering Straits between Alaska and Siberia, which during the Ice Age were at times a land bridge. They were exposed because of lowered sea levels. But migrants who crossed that land bridge from Siberia on many occasions, over periods of tens of thousands of years, would find themselves confronted then by the North American ice cap, which oddly wasn't at the tip of Alaska, but began further in. So there was living space in a bit of Alaska, but you couldn't get through the ice mountains, these literally ice mountains, 2 miles deep, covering the whole of North America and preventing access to the unglaciated parts of America. The thing is that what happened around 13,400 years ago, there had been a period of global warming.
Alexis, yes, I was so shocked when he replied to me too. We got a lot of people coming on the show, some I can't say just yet, but some big timers, like some real big timers. And not just in the community, outside of it too. Cheryl, the $4 a month gives you access to the Telegram, the Discord. You get to tell me an episode you want me to do, and you get to see a whole load of content days before it comes out. The $8 a month is the members only episodes where I really delve into things, and that's when we get into the Zoom calls and stuff like that. So again, I appreciate you wanting to truly sign up. I think everyone who has can say that, again, I really go unfiltered. I really just let it rock on the Patreon. So, and there is no lack of content. We have original exclusive series, and I'm not saying that to to be like a salesperson, I say that because people like that series we have with Micah, Decoding the Bible, that's just one of like 6 or 7 series that we have on the Patreon that really narrows down. YouTube would nick me if I put any of it up. So but yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for even considering signing up, by the way. Truly, thank you.
And the ice sheets began to melt, and a corridor opened up between what's called the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet, the 2 major ice caps in North America. And it's thought that the migration came through that corridor. Well, the thing is that exactly the same thing happened between 140,000 years ago and 120,000 years ago. There was an episode of global warming, an ice-free corridor opened up, and the same opportunity to enter the Americas was there at that period than it was at the later period. And Tom Demery's point and mine is that we have to pay much more attention to that earlier period. And that's really why I've gone ahead and written this book, is to try to put before a broad general audience, hopefully in language that makes sense, an assembly of all.
Allegedly, if you go down the rabbit hole all the way, this right here, Rick and Morty, and the tech that's shown in the show there, this is my Rick and Morty cup for my tea. Apparently that's... a lot of that's legit, allegedly, again.
All the latest information that casts doubt on the story we've been told.
Hey, Rena, I brought you up earlier for we're talking about the Assassin's Creed played backwards voice, and thank you.
Because my goodness, if archaeology is wrong about the story
Sean, we are going for probably another 30 minutes.
Of the peopling of the Americas, if it's radically wrong, as it now appears to be, then our whole understanding of human history has to change. It's not just the history of the Americas, it's the history of the entire world. It has been an absolute article of faith amongst archaeologists that civilization began in the old world. And indeed, I have a book in my library called History Begins at Sumer. And it's by Samuel Noah Kramer, a very renowned archaeologist. And it's a good book, actually. But the argument is that this is where civilization began, in the culture that we call the Sumerians in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and that it began about 6,000 years ago, and that civilization is entirely an invention of the old world and has nothing to do with...
Civilization was invented 6,000... What? I know that Graham's not saying that, but the fact that that's even... Oh, my... Wow.
The New World at all, because the New World was populated so late. This has been the argument, and this is the argument that now radically and suddenly begins to change. That the Americas, this enormous landmass, resource-rich, bountiful in every way, south of Minnesota, south of the ice cap, vast land areas that are bountiful. Get into South America, Central America, South America, the Amazon, just huge areas of land that were very, very offered great potential for human occupation. Dogma has said there were no humans there. Now
we got Scott, Rena, oh man, Mason. Okay, yeah, now we got a great stream going. Rena, yes, yeah. NFTs, SCP, yeah. I just want to make sure I don't invest in one that doesn't get me arrested because of this money laundering. HC, yes, 100%. I'll use DuckDuckGo video section, and if that doesn't work, I have another way as well. I'm with, fair, yeah. Okay, this is, with respects to Graham, yeah.
The first bits of evidence are coming out that says there were humans there. And if that's the case, then we must consider the possibility that the story of civilization might have begun in the Americas, not in the Old World at all. It might be a New World invention, not an Old World invention.
Some of the more fascinating pieces of evidence in South America have come out recently about these channels and pathways that they've found in the Amazon that could not have been created any other way but by humans.
Absolutely.
Creating irrigation, humans creating... like it appears like grids, like a city grid.
Definitely. The Amazon is a colossal mystery, and it's one of the subjects that I explore in depth in America before. First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. The Amazon basin is 7 million square kilometers in area. And within it, 5.5 million square kilometers remains almost entirely unstudied by archaeologists. And that's the 5.5 million square kilometers that is still covered by dense rainforest. And to put that into perspective, 5.5 million square kilometers is the size of the entire Indian subcontinent. So it's like saying we've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored India. You know, we've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored the Amazon. It's the same argument. 5.5 million square kilometers. The view was, again, there was a dogma. There was a preconception. Human beings couldn't have flourished in the Amazon. It's not a resource-rich area. The soils are poor. It's a difficult area, challenging to get to, very far from the Bering Straits. So the view was that humans hadn't entered the Amazon until about 1,000 years ago. And then gradually, little by little, that view has begun to change. And it's begun to change because of the tragic clearances of the Amazon, because the Amazon rainforest is literally being cut down and turned into soybean farms and cattle ranches. And in that cutting down process has emerged things that shouldn't be there at all. For example, evidence that large cities flourished in the Amazon, enormous cities, which were larger than there was a Spanish explorer who went down the Amazon River system in 1541 to 1542. He was the first European to cross the entire length of South America from...
Hey, we got Steve here. Nice. John. Bong. Hey. What's up, my brother?
west to east along the Amazon. He reported seeing incredible cities, advanced arts and crafts, millions of people, a thriving culture. And 100 years later, when other Europeans got into the Amazon, they couldn't find these cities. So they said, oh, Francisco Orellana, that was his name, made it all up. It was just a fantasy. And then in the last decade, as the clearances of the Amazon have proceeded, we've begun to see the traces of those cities. What happened was that the Spaniards brought smallpox into the Amazon. Oh. Smallpox devastated the local population because there was no immunity to it. There was a massive die-off.
Annie, great to see you. Great to see you.
The cities were deserted. Within 50 years, they were completely overgrown by the jungle, and that's why they were not seen by the explorers who came in 100 years later. But now the jungle's being cleared, those cities are emerging, and we can say that a city like London, which had a population of roughly 50,000 in the 16th century, there were cities of that size all over the Amazon. Wow. Huge numbers of them. And a possible total population of the Amazon that exceeded 20 million people.
What?
Yes, 20 million. This is the latest evidence from the Amazon. And then you ask yourself, how did they do that? How did they feed 20 million people in the Amazon? Because it's a fact, rainforest soils are poor. It's one of the reasons these soybean farms are a really stupid idea, because once you clear the rainforest, the land is largely unfertile and you can't grow stuff on it for very long. So how did they feed all these people? The answer was they invented a soil. And that soil has a name. It's called terra preta. Archaeologists refer to it as Amazonian dark earths or Amazonian black earth. It's a man-made soil. It's thousands of years old. It's full of microbes that are not found in adjoining soil. It's based around biochar. And you can take a handful of 8,000-year-old terra preta and you can add it to barren soil, and that soil will instantly become fertile. It's highly sought after in the Amazon, and it explains how they fed these people. There was science in the Amazon.
How did they create this?
Well, this...
Don't get me started on what Trudeau just enacted today, guys. Don't. Oh, man.
This is something that's not understood. It's still not understood by soil experts to this day as to how that was done, but it's one of many intriguing pieces of evidence of much higher development in the Amazon that it has been given credit for, and of a kind of science in the Amazon.
Jamie's got an image of it up there. So this is it?
This is terra preta, yeah. Exactly,
wow.
Exactly. And
so was that done by burn?
Oh, that's what they're looking at. Whoa. How the heck did ancient... Yeah. Anthropogenic dark earth or terra preta.
Burns? Did they use controlled burns?
They did.
Controlled burns.
One way that it was achieved was to do wet burning of middens. They would be burned and smolder. They wouldn't burn fiercely, which just produces charcoal. They would burn and smolder, and that what is called biochar would result, and that's part of the fertility of the soil. But the mystery is the microbial content of this soil, which is completely different from the microbes in neighboring soils, and that remains unexplained.
So, what are the theories? Composting, some sort of advanced composting?
Yes, some sort of advanced composting. But again, what has not been explained is the microbial content of these soils. So there first of all is an issue of how two things: how large populations get fed in the Amazon, and evidence that there was a culture in the Amazon that was capable of manipulating the environment in such a way that it could support large populations with the invention of terra preta. Secondly, new evidence, previously not recognized, the Amazon is basically a garden. The Amazon is a man-made rainforest. There are certain trees like Brazil nut trees or the ice cream bean tree, which are food crops, which are very, very valuable, and they dominate the tree regime in the Amazon. They're what's referred to as hyperdominant species. In other words, people living in the Amazon over thousands of years selected certain trees, which they then cultivated and grew. So the whole thing is not simply a wild, pristine rainforest. It's a very ancient man-made environment. And emerging from that man-made environment, as well as evidence of large cities, large populations, and this...
Hey, can you imagine, by the way, regardless if they were humans or ETs or maybe a mix of both, can you imagine how beautiful the environment, the clean air, like the air must have been back in those days, thousands and thousands of years ago? Like, just everything must have just been so much more beautiful.
Mysterious, dark earth.
And I say this, by the way, because I've been to the mountains in Italy a couple times in the last 10, 15 years. And when you wake up in a mountain like that, or any mountain in Europe or anything like that, it's a totally different... There's just the purity or cleanliness of the air, guys, is just, wow.
Huge geometrical structures. And again, I go into this at length in America before because I love this mystery. Mm. We have in the UK structures that are called henges. I live in the city of Bath, and about 30 miles away there's a beautiful site called Avebury and another more famous site called Stonehenge. And what a henge is a ditch which has been dug deep, and then an embankment has been pushed up outside the ditch. When people first saw these structures, they wondered if they'd been built for defense. But then it became obvious they hadn't been built for defense, because if you want to create a moat, you put it outside your embankment, not inside your embankment. So a henge is an earthwork which consists of a deep moat with a large embankment outside it. And it can be circular, it can be square, and in the UK and other parts of Europe it often contains stone circles, megalithic stone circles as well. But the henge itself is entirely an earthwork. What we find in the Amazon are thousands of henges that are now beginning to emerge from the cleared area of the jungle, and others that have been identified for the first time with LiDAR. LiDAR technology is being employed in the Amazon. It's non-destructive. You can see what's under the trees.
What is LiDAR?
Light imaging and detective radar. They bounce laser beams down into the jungle. There's a whole pattern of them. You need helicopters, and but it doesn't damage the rainforest. And you can strip away and see what's there. If this isn't too much of a diversion, let me give you the example of Guatemala. Guatemala is a small country. If I remember correctly, it's not much more than 100,000 square kilometers in size. It is filled with intriguing Mayan ruins. Everybody has heard of Tikal. Mm-hmm. What archaeologists didn't know was that literally within walking distance of Tikal, surrounding that whole area were more than 60,000 structures that they hadn't identified. And these have all been identified by LiDAR in a country that's just 100,000 kilometers in area. So you have to ask yourself, in that 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon, if LiDAR technology could be applied comprehensively, what would we find beneath there? And the evidence already is extremely tempting and extremely tantalizing. And I'm intrigued by these huge geometrical figures, which involve primarily circles and squares. And they are classic henges in the sense that they are deep ditches surrounded by huge embankments. They're extremely geometrical. For example, you can find an octagon surrounding a square. At a place called Jacques in the Amazon, you can find a square perfectly enclosing a circle. Now that is an exercise called squaring the circle that our academics have given to the Greeks. They said the Greeks were the first people who performed that exercise. But now we find in dated sites in the Amazon that this was being done in the Amazon long before the Greeks.
What are the dates?
The earliest dates that have been found in these sites now are about 3,500 years old. About 3,500 years old. But the evidence is that the sites have been constantly remade. And what intrigues me is what remains in that 5.5 million square kilometers that has not been investigated yet. We are just, I think, looking at the edges of a mystery. The archaeologists involved, who are mainly from Finland and also from Brazil, feel the same. Their estimate is that there are thousands of these structures remaining in the jungle, and they're open as to how old they may ultimately prove to be. The investigation needs to be done. But what's fascinating about them is this very powerful geometry and astronomy. So a number of the sites are perfectly aligned to true north, true south, true east, and true west. I'm not talking about magnetic north. I'm talking about true astronomical north. To do that, there's only one way to do it, and that's with astronomy. So that tells us that astronomers were at work in the Amazon. The geometry is very complex and very precise. That tells us that people with geometrical skills were at work in the Amazon. And thirdly, the scale of the sites of hundreds of meters, gigantic earthworks on the scale of hundreds of meters, tells us that this was highly organized project that was undertaken on a very large scale by very large numbers of people. It's a wonderful mystery, and it deserves...
Hey, Stephanie, great to see you in the chat. Also, Light of Jupiter, Jack Dark, yes, Mr. Trev Lee. Yes, if you can, Mr. Trev, please... email me one last time if you haven't already, genzpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do something later this week. I'm actually free if you would like, if you want me to come on the show there. Oh, Cheryl, thank you so much. No, truly, it's because of you guys. Thank you.
Much further attention. And that's Jacques, exactly. The squares, squaring the circles. So you can see the outside.
Squaring the circle, see this? Spheres and cubes. This is the same type of thing that's being seen at much higher altitudes by, at least to my knowledge, United States Air Force pilots.
Embankment, and then inside it is the square ditch. And
yeah, you see that inside is this, yeah.
Then there's another embankment inside that, and a circle inside that.
It's crazy that they made a road right through that. What
well,
assholes.
Modern road, yeah.
And you,
because there's no respect for the ancient world, unfortunately.
And there's another one. Look at that! Wow, that's incredible.
So there are thousands of these things.
How they found the stuff that they found in the Amazon? What imaging technology were they using to find all this?
Initially, it was entirely found because areas of the rainforest had been cleared. Economic interests said, we want to make a cattle ranch here, or we want to make a soya bean farm here. So we're just going to clear the rainforest. In the process of clearing the rainforest, they start discovering these earthworks that had previously been completely overgrown by the jungle. Then the next step was to say, what could we do to find out more about this? Obviously, they don't want to destroy more jungle, and luckily we have a technology which is LiDAR, as I mentioned, which uses radar. And using LiDAR, they've been able to identify many more of these sites.
Ask the United States government, if you can, what they have beyond LiDAR. They won't comment. You don't think that they can check the whole rainforest right now? They probably already have.
And then to get to the sites without destroying the jungle, and to begin excavations on them, and to find that they go back, in the cases of the ones that have been explored so far, at least 3,000 years. This is an intriguing development, completely unexplained in our understanding of the Amazon. And what it suggests is a heritage of extremely ancient knowledge. You don't wake up one morning and create a perfectly geometrical.
That's interesting, Brandy. Thank you. Wow. Huh.
Square or circular earthwork that's perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west on an enormous scale. There has to be a background to that. There has to be a reason for doing it. And the evidence is none of these sites were lived in. There's no habitation refuse found in them whatsoever. We don't know what they were used for. I make the case in America before that they're connected to a system of ideas which is found all around the world, which is to do with death and the afterlife destiny.
See how he said he thinks they're connected to a system of ideas? I think that's the spiritual angle that we've been currently suppressed on.
Of the soul. And I go into the issue of ayahuasca in this book because, first of all, ayahuasca is itself another example of Amazonian science. As you and I and many of the listeners and viewers know, the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But dimethyltryptamine is not normally accessible through the gut. We have to smoke it or vape it to get that rocket ship to the other side of reality. And the journey lasts, 10, 12 minutes, not much more than that, and sometimes quite a lot less. What ayahuasca does is it makes DMT available through the gut. The reason it's not available through the gut is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. And that switches off DMT on contact. The ayahuasca vine, which is one of the two ingredients of the ayahuasca brew, the other ingredient is leaves that contain DMT. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT to be accessed orally, which produces a rather different journey from the smoked or vaped DMT trip. It's a much longer journey. It's 4 or 5 hours. It allows you to integrate and to interrelate with the strange landscapes in which you find yourself amongst and the entities that you encounter. I'm not making any claims about the reality status of those entities, but what I am saying, and it's a fact, is that people who work with DMT and ayahuasca do encounter what they construe to be entities who communicate with them intelligently. So somebody in the Amazon, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, selected 2 that are not psychoactive on their own, but when put together, create an extraordinary visionary brew. And ayahuasca means the vine of the dead. And what it's connected to in South American religious and spiritual thinking is what happens to us when we die. The Tucano, who are an Amazonian people who work regularly with ayahuasca, I mean, the Tucano actually will give a teaspoonful of ayahuasca to a newborn infant. They feel ayahuasca is so important that there is a hidden realm around us which we are not normally
Thank you, Brandy, for that. I did not even know.
aware of, and we need to be aware of it, and ayahuasca is an important part of that. In their ayahuasca journeys, the Tucano shamans experience visions, and they will then come back to an alert, normal problem-solving state of consciousness, and they will paint and depict their visions. And what's intriguing, and I go into it in the book, is that quite a number of the Tucano paintings of the other world, of the afterlife realm, of the entrance to the other world, are geometrical, and they look exactly like the geoglyphs. So I'm beginning to wonder whether these geoglyphs were part of a system of spiritual ideas concerning what happens to us after death and what we need to do in this life to ensure a beneficial outcome. And oddly enough, that same system of ideas is found in the Mississippi Valley.
IBI UFOs, welcome. Bong radio fractals, exactly.
In the Amazon, it involves particularly ayahuasca and the belief that the ayahuasca journey takes you to the afterlife realm and a journey along the Milky Way. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound builder sites up and down the Mississippi Valley, particularly Moundville in Alabama, exactly the same system of religious ideas associated with geometrical constructions. That on death, the soul, they're very specific, ascends to the constellation of Orion, transits from the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, makes a journey along the Milky Way, which they call the Path of Souls, and encounters challenges and ordeals where the soul must account for the life that it has lived. Then we go to Egypt, and what do we find? The same system of ideas. The soul must rise up to the constellation of Orion. There's a narrow shaft cut through the southern side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which...
When it says the soul must rise up through the constellation of Orion, is it possible that's a metaphor for the soul trap? Again, because the pyramids point to the Orion constellation, which is allegedly the Orion Draco group that influenced such cultures. I don't know, I'm just spewing it out there. Let me know what you guys think in the chat, if possible.
Targets directly the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Widely accepted as a star shaft or a soul shaft. The soul would rise up through that shaft, get to the constellation of Orion, which stands by the banks of the Milky Way. It would then transit to the Milky Way, which the ancient Egyptians called the Winding Waterway. And it would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would be confronted by challenges and ordeals. Very similar idea to the Tucano, very similar idea to the Mississippi Valley. As far as we know, none of these cultures were in contact with one another. Either we're dealing with a huge, unbelievable, extraordinarily detailed coincidence involving architecture and ideas, or we're looking at a legacy that was inherited in all of these different places from a remote common ancestor. And I believe that that's what we're looking at.
What do we think the people from the ancient Mississippi Valley, that culture, what do we think they were using if they weren't using ayahuasca, or do we think that's what they were using?
Well, that's an interesting question, whether visionary substances are the only way to get into altered states of consciousness. And I would say they are definitely not. Of course, there are visionary substances which are used in Native American vision quests. I've had the privilege of peyote ceremony with the Native American church.
I've never done that. What is that like?
I loved it, actually. I thought it was amazing. It doesn't overpower you in the way that DMT or ayahuasca does. It's much gentler. It's much more. You feel much more integrated and connected with nature. Your thought processes are quite clear. It felt just like a very beautiful and healing experience. And I love the ceremony that I'm inside a teepee with 30 or 40 other people, and that there are specific roles that are assigned to those different individuals. One will keep the door, another will be responsible for the fire, which is a work of art in itself. Just gazing into that fire and the glowing embers is enough to induce an altered state of consciousness on its own. Incredible drumming, which drives your state of consciousness into a kind of peak experience. This is a technology for accessing other levels of experience and other levels of reality. And it's clear that the Native Americans had a number of advanced technologies in this area. The sun dance doesn't use a substance, but it uses austerity, it uses pain to drive an altered state of consciousness. The objective in every case seems to be, let's just for a while get ourselves out of the narrow, rigid frame of the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. We all need that. It's incredibly useful. Hunter-gatherers need it just as much as people in cities need it. But it's not the only state of consciousness available to human beings. And maybe that's one of the big mistakes that we're making in our culture, and was not made in shamanistic societies.
That is a really interesting breakdown. That maybe that is one of the big mistakes we're making in our culture. When people point to the problems that we have in this country, one of the problems we have is our inability to connect with each other, or to recognize that we're all sharing this space and time together, and instead wanting to uphold our own religious or ideological ideas as being the only one way to get going, the only one way to get through. And one of the things that I've found with these psychedelic experiences, it really makes ideologies seem, if not preposterous, at the very least insignificant in comparison to human experiences.
Absolutely.
The experience of camaraderie and friendship and love. You realize, like, oh, this is what's important.
This is what it's really about.
Yes, not enforcing your ideas or pushing them on other people and forcing people to behave the way you behave, but instead love.
And think about religious ideas, which cause so much division, so much chaos, so much hatred, so much fear, so much suspicion in the world today. Is it really what we want?
Light of Jupiter, I'll address that right after this round is over, because then we'll probably call it, and I'll address that.
To do as human beings.
And yes, Jack Dark, I think that's what it is. Soul traps, or it's possible these soul shafts could have also been soul shafts of the pyramids could have also been an older version of what we now know to be a more sophisticated soul trap. I'm just spewing out random things out of my mind, but actually, you know what, Light of Jupiter, I'll address it now. Thoughts on the CE5 protocols? I think they're great in terms of the premise of them. I think that the marketing side of it is where it loses me, but at the same time, I'm concerned that people that do such protocols are summoning something they may not know exactly, maybe summoning some type of government, I don't want to say drone, but very advanced reverse engineered ET tech that the government uses, so that when these protocols are done, it's not always the case that actual benevolent ETs are encountering you, but that's just one of a few different concerns I have. However, though, I think the concept of simple meditation and just going out looking into the sky and, putting your intention out there, I think that's fantastic. That's why when people say CE5, in my humble opinion, I think the term is being used a little bit too vaguely nowadays, but that's just my take on it.
Simply to accept a package of ideas that were believed in by our ancestors, to accept them whole, without question, as absolute fact, which we regard as such authoritative fact that in some cases we're willing to be deeply unpleasant to people who hold different views, or perhaps even kill them. We've had this, this recent event in Sri Lanka, primarily a religiously motivated terrorist event. It happens all over the world, that people feel so convinced that the inherited package of ideas that they had nothing to do with creating and that they have never questioned, they're so convinced that those ideas are right that in extreme cases they're actually prepared to kill other human beings who hold different ideas. Are they so insecure in their own beliefs that they're prepared to go to that level of actually murdering another human being who holds? They're so threatened by the other beliefs that other human beings hold. So it's an abnegation of our responsibility as human beings. We should be questioning things. We should not be accepting packages of ideas intact, fully formed, and using them to drive the way we behave towards one another. That was part of the human story, but we need to move on from that. I mean, it's a very dangerous situation in a very complex modern world with billions of human beings on the planet to have these kind of energies being generated where certain groups of people are saying, we are absolutely right and you are absolutely wrong. We are superior, you are inferior. This is a very, very dangerous path that we're on, and it needs to be changed. Personally, I know this is not a comment that will go down well with many people, but I am strongly opposed to nationalism. I don't see any virtue in nationalism. It is an accident of birth, which nation you were born in. It was nothing that you did for your own merit. You didn't earn that. You were born by accident in a particular nation. Why should we automatically feel that other people who were born by accident in that particular nation have something special in common with us, and that we together are a group who are much more important than other groups of people? I've been privileged to spend my life traveling around the world, living with communities all over the world. And one thing that really comes across to me strongly, it should be a cliche, and yet it's not, is...
Oh, no, just to be clear, I have nothing personal against Greer or anything like that. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, look, I have my Patreon too. We all have to make a living. It's more so the excess and anyways, the premise in which Mr. Greer speaks on, I got to give him credit for things that he did, 15, 20, 25 years ago. I can't deny that contributed to the attempted progression of the UFO community. But, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I do see both sides of that.
Is that we are all one family, that humans are intimate.
There's a recent, not a recent one, about a year back, I think Stephen Greer went on the Higher Side Chats with Greg Carlwood, and I gotta, Greg is one of the reasons I'm actually where I am now, to be truthful with you folks. So that, in my opinion, is a great interview to really let you think for yourself on Greer, and I'm not trying to sway you in good or negative, truly, guys. It's just, in my opinion, if you want to take an unbiased perspective, I think that's a great interview to listen to.
Interconnected all around the world, that you can go to the remotest area of the Amazon jungle and find the same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams that we have in industrialized cities, shared by the hunter-gatherers in the middle of the Amazon. So our similarities as human beings and what we share in common at the emotional level and at the level of love and at the level of heart are far more important than our differences that are defined by the nation or the political group in which we grew up in. And when I say I'm against nationalism, I need also to make clear that does not mean, and I hope I'm not taken out of context by others who are listening to this, that does not mean I'm in favor of world government. I detest governments. That's another thing we need to grow out of. We don't need governments anymore. If we have them, they should have a very minimal role in our society. I think it's possible for the human race to relate as one family without leaders and governments who are exploiting the worst aspects of our character, the lowest common denominator of our society, deliberately encouraging fears and hatreds and suspicion. What responsible leaders should be doing is encouraging love and unity, and their failure to do that, in my view, disqualifies them from the leadership role entirely. And that's why I've often said I would like to see a situation in which no head of state can be appointed to that position unless he or she has first had 12 sessions of ayahuasca. That would be the condition. Don't even bother applying for the job if you haven't done this.
And we have to be there where you have it.
And we want to see that you're drinking every drop. Yes. And we want an experienced shaman present who's really going to guide you through the journey. And I suspect that would be a transformative experience for many of our political class, and that they would start to question why they do what they do, why they exploit fears in order to magnify their own position. They'd start to question that and to wonder about a different destiny for humanity. But that's a dream. I guess it's not going to happen.
It's very, very, very well said. And I couldn't agree more. My hope is that what you were saying and what we were discussing earlier about how the internet has sort of eroded our faith in many institutions as being the only or the primary source of knowledge, that I hope that takes place globally in terms of the way we view government. Yeah. And that we do, and that your idea of I love what America stands for. And what America stands for is kind of a nation that's where people go to. This is one of the more insidious problems with this idea of building walls and keeping people out and making it incredibly difficult to get here. The reason why I'm here is because it was pretty easy to get here.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
That's the essence of America, a free and open society.
Come here and do better.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea behind it. And I would hope that this idea of being able to just, if you want to do better, you can anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
This could eventually spread out.
Yeah.
This is my hope.
I believe it can spread out, and I see many signs of hope in America. America has become a big part of my life, not just because I wrote this book, but because I have children who are now living in America. I have a son and daughter-in-law who live in LA. I have another son and daughter-in-law who live in Boston. America, I'm British, but America has become a very central part of my life, and it's a fascinating and amazing country, and it's been my privilege to travel thousands of miles across America, across many, many, many different states, and I love this country. It's an amazing place. Only in America could we see happening what has happened with cannabis. You know, the fact that at a local level, individuals have got together, mobilized petitions, organized votes, and changed the law. Literally stuck a finger up at central government and said,
I like how you worded that, Scott. But yeah, I agree with others as well. Yep.
fuck off. This is none of your business. What I do with my consciousness in the inner sanctum of my own life is not the business of the state. That's a very American feeling. It's something that you don't find often in other countries where the state is granted much more power and much more authority than it perhaps should be. Americans are naturally questioning of government authority, and that is what has led to the increasing legalization of cannabis, which is going to change the world in lots of ways. But then ironically, at the same time, see, the thing about democracies is that in order to get things done in a democracy, you need to persuade people of your point of view. So information becomes very important in democracy.
No, but see, this is what I mean, Mason. Unacknowledged, that documentary. If it's the one I'm thinking of, I like that one. The recent one he put out, Cosmic Hoax. Again, the principles, in my opinion, just my opinion. My opinion is no better than your guys. The principles I like, but once he started getting into this whole pushing his perspective. Not even against Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, which he did, but again, the whole thing of there were just certain things that, anyways. But to be fair, free world, free country, he's decided to, push a particular viewpoint, and so be it. You can argue what I'm saying right now is a viewpoint as well, so.
Democracies, and information can be abused.
Oh.
People can be misled with information. They can be told that what they're receiving is the truth, whereas in fact it's not the truth. And you can end up with a kind of dictatorship that the people have given their assent to on the basis of false information. And frankly, I'd rather have a real dictatorship, which is out in the open and clear, rather than one that has been subtly manipulated into position through manipulation.
So we're probably going to call it, but see how Fortnite, I just skipped through it really quickly. They asked me, I haven't seen this before, they asked me fill out a couple surveys on some power-ups and weapons inside the game itself. Folks, I know it sounds silly, but think about a data mining operation. For those that have access to that data, you can find out what's particularly the younger generation that plays these games, what they like, what you can gauge and market future products to down the road. Yeah, just thought I'd throw that in there because last time I played at least a month or two ago, Fortnite did not have that option or ask, hey, give us some feedback. That's going to go, again, we agree to the terms and conditions, which we never really read because even lawyers can't read through them because they're so long and word salady. And there you go. That's how they have us. But anyways, yeah, exactly. There we go. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you all so much for coming on the stream. It was a fantastic time. The only reason I haven't done it sooner is just because my immune system's been taking a beating. So I've been barely able to get through some of the recordings. But now that things are much better, I'd like to do another stream either end of this week or this weekend at the latest. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much. We listened to about an hour of Graham Hancock. I'm thinking we'll continue it on the next stream. We'll do the final hour and a half some gaming. We'll continue the next hour of this, and then or we'll top it off maybe even with final hour and a half, and then we'll go on to what you guys asked for next time. Dick Cheney tripping that. That guy, I think he would, like, his brain would implode because the ethics and morals of that guy don't, like, I think that the DMT or whatever he's taking would say we don't want to affect him. That's how crappy it would be, in my opinion. Oh man, yeah, Jack, I appreciate that. We're definitely going to be doing this a lot more often. I'm thinking of even doing a week where we're doing 3-4 days straight or 3-4 days throughout the week streaming, just to change it up, but we'll see. Anyways, guys, thank you so much, and we'll catch you all very, very soon. Have a great evening or morning, depending where in the world you are, guys.